in boxing, but that's at the top. At the bottom, it isn't quite the same. Even for those on the rise, there's not an awful lot of cash in the boxing world, and if you're just starting out, well, it can be a very costly exercise indeed. But don't take my word for it. Here's the former European champion TalkSport's Spencer Oliver.
You're turning professional and you're boxing, let's say, York Hall on a non-televised fight. You have to sell tickets to earn any money, but you have to cover the wages of your opponent as well. So if you don't have the ability to be able to sell enough tickets, you effectively have to pay to fight.
A far cry then from Jake Paul facing Mike Tyson in 2024, when the purse was reported to be around £48 million. But the vast amounts of cash lining the top dog's pockets isn't the norm in a typical fight.
Let's say you're lucky and you get between 5 and 10 grand. You're going to get 10 grand max for that. 10% goes to the trainer, 25% goes to the manager. Then we've got the tax man to pay as well. So we're cutting that money in at least half. So now you've got 5 grand for a 10-week camp. So you're talking about a guy here earning, he might be clearing 500 quid a week. How do you support a family on that? So boxers chase the dream. And, you know, there's probably 2% of them that actually make it.
So say you do make it and you start to rise up the ranks. Strikers Boxing, a training academy, says the mid-tier fighters can earn more, somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 a fight, depending on record, profile, opponent and popularity of weight class. It's only at the top level does the real cash start flowing in, with the top-tier professionals, i.e. those going for titles, earning 6 figures a fight. Something else you'll have heard of is the terms prize fighter or journeyman. A prize fighter is, as it sounds, someone who picks up fights where they can and gets a nice big check if they win. Journeymen are the fighters who take on up-and-comers, effectively used for experience in the ring. Even if they're going up against the real prospects, a young Anthony Joshua, for example, these guys will be lucky to earn more than 10 grand. So the average boxer isn't as rich as you'd think.
Happy Sunday evening and welcome to Danny Kelly's Trans-Europe Express. As many of you will already be aware, Danny is away. Get well soon, our king. So in the meantime, I'm Andy Brassell and we are keeping it going with 3 hours of news and stories from across the continent. We're also lucky enough to be joined tonight by an esteemed member of the TEE family, our very own Daniele Fisichella, freshly back from bricking it in Bergamo as Italy got past Northern Ireland. Not that comfortably, but they are still in the mix for the World Cup as the final slots for 2026 fill up this week. Daniele will be telling us all about his nervy Thursday evening and Italy's prospects in the final, and will also be looking at the rest of the Euro World Cup playoffs while checking in on the star pupils who've already booked their trips to the US, Mexico, to Atletico. Bitter arguments over fixture schedules in France and Manuel Neuer at 40. Tim Vickery is with us to look back on Brazil locking horns with one of the European favourites. Philippe Auclair joins us to talk about his new book about Kylian Mbappe later. We look at the mutiny at Lazio, and we will finish off later with your questions in our final section. So get a hold of us at TalkSport or text us on 81089. Bienvenue à bord, Trans-Europe Express. Yeah, good evening, and thanks for joining me and Daniele this evening. How are you, Daniele?
Hi, Andy. I'm very well, thank you. More relieved, a bit better than I was a few days before my trip to Bergamo, but of course, a bit tense for what's coming up in the next 48 hours.
Yeah. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just bask in the glow of victory for the moment. Now, as you're aware, me and Daniele are here, at least partly, because Daniel Kelly is not with us this evening. Danny, we're all with you, as all the listeners are, and we hope to have you back soon while we're keeping the seat warm. But he would tell us the show goes on. And let's talk about Italy, as Daniele has just come back from there, because, of course, as many of you will have seen, Italy 2, Northern Ireland 0 on Thursday night. The worst didn't happen, Daniele, but the spectre of the worst happening was hanging over a lot of it this evening. You were there, so tell us about what the feeling was, because the last couple of times I went to Italy, I sensed a lot of apprehension.
And the apprehension and the tension was still there, at least for the first 45 minutes of couldn't really go past them in the first half. But even before the game and before kickoff, the atmosphere was very nervy, almost bordering on hysteria. And I think the media themselves and Gennaro Gattuso, the national manager, perhaps didn't contribute to the most relaxed approach to this game. There was a lot of talks about almost a generational challenge. There were a lot of mentions of Italy teenagers, of Italy children who never watched Italy in a World Cup, of course, because Italy haven't played in a World Cup since 2014. So many younger people than us never had the chance of watching them. They never saw Italy winning a knockout games. The last one they won was the final against France in 2006. So all of this narrative fueled the pre-match, and I think the players themselves suffer from it. Eventually, as they took the lead in the second half, deservedly with Sandro Tonali, the cork came off, the tension came off. And, it was almost like a pressure cooker when the steam comes off. And Italy, in the end, managed to get the job done. But there will be questions, and there are still questions about their state of mind, the way they're playing, and the challenge ahead, of course, on Tuesday.
And you were saying to me there are loads of questions over Gennaro Gattuso. For a lot of people, he's not a great coach, it's fair to say. He had a really unusual coaching career, but he's always leaned into quite difficult challenges. He's never shied away from really tough tasks. And you look at, in the past, Napoli, Milan, when he took them on, even Hajduk Split, the last job he had before he went into this one. I mean, an interesting decision that he took, and this sort of plays into your trip, is the fact that he chose to have the game at Bergamo and not at San Siro, saying something about taking the pressure off the players. Now, he said, look, what I don't want is us playing at San Siro and every time we misplace a pass, everyone getting on our backs. Did you feel around about half-time, when Italy still hadn't scored, that that was probably a wise decision?
It was, retrospectively it was, and I think Gattuso chose the ground and the environment very, very carefully, bearing in mind that his first game in charge of Italy was in Bergamo when they played against Estonia, and similarly in that group stage game, they were 0-0 at half-time in a game that they were desperate to win, and to win with a large scoreline to try to make up the difference with Norway, which in the end they didn't do it. But after the first 45 minutes back then against Estonia, the Bergamo crowd didn't boo them, and so they didn't boo them against Northern Ireland 3 days ago. And why Bergamo? Because of course Bergamo is the home of Atalanta, is a team that has given few players to this national side, so obviously there is quite a strong alliance, and is not one of the big cities in Italy with there are Inter, Milan, Juventus, Roma and Napoli, where of course the locals have got their own favorites, but also have got the players they dislike. And if you take the case, for example, of a player like Alessandro Bastoni, who's been booed everywhere he went since the incident with Kalulu in the Derby d'Italia and the simulation, imagine had he misplaced a pass and playing in Rome or in Turin, well, they would have swallowed it up in a way. Whereas in Bergamo, which by the way, it's where he started his career, they were much more condescending with him. And Gattuso did acknowledge that in the end. So that tells you how the fine line, the fine margin that these Italy sides needs to navigate, the tightrope they are into, even this plays into the mind of the players. And I think in the end, it helped. But okay, let's go back to the performance as well, no matter where they played. It was a poor performance in the first half. I think it was a performance that was the derivative of the fact that Italy plays with a 3-5-2 formation, which is what the vast majority of Italian teams play in Serie A. It is a formation that deprives Italy of creative midfielders, that leaves a lot of the build-up on the wings, emptying the midfielders and then trying to hit the ball first time for the strikers. And the back three of Northern Ireland, with Trae Hume especially, particularly commanding, they were absolutely in control in the first half. Then they really had to up the tempo, Italy, and they managed to score with the most British of our player, Tonali, which had something different, of course. It was definitely the best player on the pitch on Tuesday.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about Sandro Tonali, because so much speculation about his future at the moment, especially with the way Newcastle's season is going, the feeling that it might be his time to move on. And I think, to his credit, actually, he gave a really, really frank answer when he was asked, what were his plans for the future. And he said, well, look, I don't want to say I'm going to stay forever and walk out on the club, which I think is realistic. He's one of their biggest assets if they want to rebuild Newcastle, and they feel they're going to do that maybe this summer. I mean, ever since he left, there's always been speculation in the Italian media that Juventus are going to come and get him to make up for the fact they missed out on him the first time. I mean, just let's get this straight, Daniele. There's no way a Serie A club can afford him, right? Especially a guy who, as you say, is that adjusted to the Premier League.
There is no way any Italian clubs can afford any Premier League player, any Premier League top player on their current wage. So let's put this out of question for any potential signings. Anyone who's in his prime and plays in a Premier League club is not affordable for Serie A unless they decide to take a pay cut, unless the Serie A manages to get a creative financial agreement with the clubs, with the players themselves. However, having said that, Tonali has not made a secret that after 2 seasons in Britain, one of which he spent on the sideline because of the gambling scandal he was involved in. I think he would like to come back to Italy at some point and probably sees this summer as an opportunity. He left Milan, who, by the way, is a fan of, and he's been one of the cornerstones of the last Milan that won the Scudetto as well. He left it because Milan received an offer that was unrefusable, and it was the biggest sale in the history of AC Milan. So he didn't want really to leave Italy, but of course saw going to the Premier League as an opportunity. Now, whether he would like to move to Juventus or to another Italian club, or perhaps to return to Milan, remains to be seen. But of course, for a player of his caliber, the idea of not playing in the Champions League next season, which, by the way, both Milan and Juventus looked quietly comfortable, probably more Milan than Juve at the moment, but Juve have got good chances to do it. I think, he would love to play in the Champions League, but there are other clubs as well that could really look into Tonali, who, by the way, for me, seems at the moment Italy's best player, as I said before, the one that is more accomplished to play in a high-tempo league like the Premier League is.
We're going to move on from Italy in a second, Daniele, but just briefly, tell us a bit about the final against Bosnia. I mean, I've been to Zenica. It's not Sarajevo. You get to Sarajevo and then you go to somewhere that's quite stark, quite sparse sort of city, and it's a really hostile atmosphere with often quite heavy pitch. So this is somewhere where Bosnia are going to lean heavily on their home advantage. What is the feeling around Italy this time? That they're going to go there and get it done?
The feeling is of utter fear and intimidation because of the stadium Bilino Pole of Zenica, capacity 15,000, by the way, reduced capacity to 9,000. It's going to be a cauldron, and that's how it's been presented. The weather has been treacherous. There's been snow in Zenica up to yesterday. The ground is going to be heavy. There's going to be a lot of Bosnian people coming from all over Europe in Zenica to support the team outside of the stadium. So Italy are going to find an hostile environment, and this has been the talk since Bosnia secured the place into the playoff final. But Italy knows that on paper they are favorites, they are stronger. Bosnia are a side that will let Italy play, that will happily surrender possession. However, unlike Northern Ireland, Bosnia are a team that got the best players up front, not only Dzeko, who scored against Wales, but Seferovic, Ali Ahmedovic, the 17 years old who came in and changed the game against Wales. He was such a great spark, plus few players from Kolasinac to Muaremovic who play in Italy, so they know us really, really well. Italy they know they're in for a tough time. Bosnia are a physical side, are the side that actually in these World Cup qualifiers in UEFA has committed the most fouls and has received the most cards. So in Italy know what is going to expect them. So yes, there are few factors that contribute to the sense of anxiety that precedes such an important game.
Well, okay, let's exhale for the next section, and we're going to be talking about the rest of the UEFA World Cup qualifying here on Trans Europe Express. Not just Italy waiting on their place in the US, Canada and Mexico.
Stefan, the cost of missing out on the Champions League. If I throw four at you here, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester United or Newcastle, missing out in Champions League, who would feel it most?
Yeah, I think Newcastle would definitely feel it the most, just because the base they're coming off is that much smaller. So therefore the proportion that's associated with Champions League football is that much bigger. And they probably did something like £55 million of UEFA money. And then on top of that, obviously had the 5 home games on top, which are, or 6, probably 6 actually, when you, I think they had a playoff. So that's 6 home games on top. I mean, that's obviously very significant. So you're talking about 75 million quid out of revenue of, let's say, 300 this season. You know, it's quite a big drop next season if it's not there. Now, obviously, they may get Europa or the conference. The conference doesn't really move.
Yeah, welcome back to Trans Europe Express here on TalkSport every Sunday night. Me, Andy Brassell, Daniele Fisichella with me, and we're going to be talking further about the World Cup European playoffs, of course. We're going to get into that in a second, but we've got a poll for you this evening if you want to get involved. Now, one man who won't be at the World Cup this summer, a titan of the tournament, a winner in 2014, Manuel Neuer, turned 40 years old this week. Incredible, and still going, of course, for Bayern Munich, one of the best clubs on the continent. So we're asking you this evening, who is the best goalkeeper of the last 25 years? Manuel Neuer, Gigi Buffon, Iker Casillas, or an other? I'm sure you'll have plenty of other ideas as well. You can text us 81089, or you can get at us at Talk Sport as well. Be really interested to know what you're thinking. Of course, we can bring you up to date with latest friendlies. Normally, we're in the thick of it, in the weeds, shouting when there are goals, me and Danny and all the rest of it, but not so many games this evening. We do have Colombia versus France at the moment. That's taking place just outside Washington, D.C. 53rd minute at the moment. Colombia 0, France 2. First half goals from Désiré Doué, his first for the French national team, for the PSG star. Salah, of course, who took over the Champions League final last season. And the second, maybe more surprisingly, scored by Marcus Thuram, only his third goal for the national team, 33 games in. And we might be talking about him a little bit later with Daniele. But first, let's get back to those UEFA World Cup playoff qualifiers, and we're going to start with Wales versus Bosnia. We touched a little bit on Bosnia beforehand, but absolutely heartbreaking for Wales, Daniele. I don't think they could have really done much more in that, but an interesting combination right near the end of normal time with Edin Dzeko scoring the goal and a guy at nearly half his age setting him up.
Yes, and exactly, Edin Dzeko, 40 years old, who started this season at Fiorentina, unlucky spells, then moved to the Zweiliga, the second league of Germany with Schalke 04, and doing much better there, already conquering the fans. But
best player in the league.
Yeah,
by a mile.
Set up by the 17 years old Ali Akhmedovic, who was on the books at Bayer Leverkusen up to January, and then moved to RB Salzburg, but he's gonna go back to the Bundesliga. You know, a creative midfielder, really, who also took the decisive penalty in the end to send Bosnia through. But to go back to Wales, unlucky, I would say, because they had the game in control. They hit the woodwork twice. They took the lead with Darren James, and they hit the woodwork again. And they let the game slip away from them. They let the game becoming chaotic and frantic, which suited more Bosnia, who in the end had nothing to lose and throw the kitchen sink at it and find a goal from a set piece. And then in extra time, both teams look knackered. Bosnia perhaps try more to disrupt rather than to play, and it looked like they were aiming for penalties, and that's what got them through. But heartbreaking, really, for Wales, who have missed on another major tournament on penalties after being knocked out by Poland in the playoffs for the Euro 2024 in similar circumstances.
And if we're talking to hard luck stories, we have to talk about the Republic of Ireland. They were 2-0 up in Prague against Czechia, let it slip again in the end, right near the end. And I thought Czechia were very disappointing. I mean, most teams in Europe, Daniele, would like a bit of their front line. If you look at Patrick Schick, when he's fit, he's one of the best there is. Pavel Schulz had a brilliant season for Lyon. But I would say, even though they're at home again in the final, it feels to me that they're very much the second favourites against Denmark, who beat North Macedonia quite comfortably.
I agree with you. Czechia had a very rough patch to this playoff. They sacked the manager after a disappointing start to the qualifying campaign. They were beaten 5-1 by Croatia, lost to Faroe Island as well. And now the new manager, Kubek, kind of steadied the ship, but had a very bad start against the Republic of Ireland. Again, 2-0 up. And then Republic of Ireland made the mistake of conceding a penalty right after scoring the second goal. A rush of blow to the head from one of the defenders from the Republic of Ireland, gave away a penalty. Then Ireland hit the post in the second half. It could have sealed it. And in the end, they conceded from a corner 5 minutes to go on the clock, similar like Wales. But I think for the Republic of Ireland, there are a lot of positive on these campaigns. Not many teams can say they've beaten Portugal and Hungary in the same qualifying campaign. This is a young side. Apart from Seamus Coleman, there was no other starter over 30 years old. So Helmir Hilgrimarsson has done a good job, and they do look on course, I believe, to qualify for Euro 2028, which of course they will co-host alongside Scotland, Wales and England. When it comes to Czechia, I think a team that is aging, I would say, perhaps aging not too well. And against Denmark, who have got probably the best front three of the teams in the playoff, Damsgaard, Gustav Isaksen, 2 goals in 2 minutes against Macedonia, and Rasmus Højlund, of course. Although Czechia plays at home, I think, Denmark should edge it.
Yeah, before we get to the rest of it, we've got a third goal in Washington, D.C. It's now Colombia 0, France 3, approaching the hour mark. Second goal for Desiree Doué of the evening after a lovely counter-attacking move set up, put on a plate for him by Marcus Thuram. So we'll be having a chat about that €85 million buyout clause again a little bit later, Daniele. But in the meantime, talking of expensive strikers, Victor Gyökeres got Sweden in the spot. Hat-trick for him in Valencia as Sweden beat Ukraine 3-1, and they progressed to a final against Poland. And we're talking about young players. A debut there for Oskar Piatyszewski, 17 years old, and he really looked the part already, the Porto star who we've been infusing about a lot in recent weeks. But a huge moment for Gyökeres and a huge moment for Piotr Zielinski, because even though Lewandowski got the equaliser, Zielinski got the winner from range. Has he been having the best season of his life in Serie A?
He's up there with the season he had at Napoli under Maurizio Sarri and Spalletti. After the last season at Inter with Simone Inzaghi, he barely played. He was often on the bench and played mostly cameos. This season is more of a regular starter, and he's been scoring more goals from long range, as the one he scored on Thursday in the Poland victories. Poland looked a little bit laboured, to be fair, in the first half against Albania, but that's the Poland that we've been used to see for many, many years. In the end, they got the job done. Again, Poland, an interesting story, because they changed the manager recently, and now with the new man in charge, they are unbeaten in 7 games under Jan Urban's management. But they're going to take on a Swedish side that also changed the manager midway through the qualifiers. Graham Potter took over. It was the third game in charge for him, the first victory, and it seems that they more resemble a Sweden of old, more resilient, more clinical, of course. The goal from Gyökeres testified that, and there is more enthusiasm around Sweden this time coming forward. A team that has only qualified once for the World Cup since 2006, and that was in 2018. So we could say pressure is on them as well. But with Graham Potter being offered a contract extension until 2030, of course, there is the feeling that perhaps the best is yet to come for this Swedish side, and also for the manager, who will be able to improve them and to leave his mark long term, not just in this tournament, if of course they manage to qualify.
Yeah, massive show of faith there in the Swedish FA, giving Potter a contract extension. Maybe they needed that sort of stability. Benjamin Nygren of Celtic was really, really good in that game as well, setting up the first goal for Gyökeres. The final one, Kosovo versus Turkey. Of course, we talk a lot about Turkish football on here, Daniele, so I'm afraid as you're in the fold, you're going to have to do the same. Look, Kosovo have done amazingly to get here, but Turkey, they are a team that we all want to see in this World Cup, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, it's a team that we haven't seen in the World Cup since 2002. And I want to see Arda Güler and Kenan Yildiz playing together, as they did on the first day against Romania. Turkey deserved to win. If they had a number 9, if they had a striker, I think they would be really, really threatening. They play with a false 9, with Burak Yilmaz, sometimes with Oktürkoğlu, but they still produce quite a lot of scoring chances because of Arda Güler and Kenan Yildiz. How good was the pass of Arda Güler to spot the run of Fedi Kardioglu, who gave Turkey the lead? Unfortunately for Romania, they couldn't qualify, and unfortunately for Mircea Lucescu, the 80-year-old manager, they couldn't really make it. They didn't have many chances. They only hit the post in the second half with Nicolae Stanciu. But now they have to travel to Pristina against Kosovo, and that is the big story of these qualifiers. Kosovo is a nation that up until 2016 hadn't joined UEFA. It is a nation that is not recognized by Serbia, that is not recognized by Slovakia, the team that they beat 4-3 on Thursday in the semi-finals of the playoff, but is a team that, if you look on paper, and not only on paper, Goalkeeper not only is young, but really, really exciting. A lot of good players, from Fini Kaslani, who plays at Hoffenheim and is having a great season, to Milot Rashica, once played at Norwich, now plays at the Fenerbahce, Edon Zergova, Juventus, Merin Voivoda of Como, Vera Muriki, the veteran who plays at Mallorca. The list, it is quite long. But Turkey, ranked 23rd in the world, of course, they are favorites. They haven't lost in 7 competitive away fixtures. So obviously Vincenzo Montella side should be able to progress it, but this is going to be another one probably extremely tense.
So we've done all the late night swats, trying to get in at the last minute. We're going to do the boffins next. Those are already at the World Cup here on Trans Europe Express.
You played in Korea and Japan, didn't you? World Cup in 2002. Did you find it hard, the weather conditions to play in?
They are tough, and in South Africa as well. We played a game, and then the altitude, the ball moves different and everything. And if you're not used to it, as we know, we all love to go on holiday in the summer, but playing football, running around in that heat and that weather, it takes its toll at the time, and we're just not a nation that's used to that. So that's one of the major things I look at when it comes to that tournament being over there.
What about strikers? We know Harry Kane's going to go, but if you looked at the Euros, he was injured, wasn't he? And Gareth Southgate was still playing game. Maybe they didn't trust other strikers in the squads. What do you think of tonight? Do you think Solanke and Calvert-Lewin have to put in a performance?
I think it's their chance of breaking in, isn't it? It's their chance of solidifying themselves in that talk of being the one to take over, because we really don't know who's going to take over from Harry Kane or what it's going to look like after he leaves. I was always an advocate for
Trans Europe Express here on TalkSport. Andy Brassell and Daniele Fisichella taking you through the World Cup qualifiers. Like I was saying, less games than normal. We're still keeping you up to date with Colombia 0, France 3 out there in the States. 65 minutes in, we've just had a double substitution. Ekitike and Camavinga coming on for Kolo Muani and Zaire Emery. So plenty of Premier League representation on that pitch. But with there being so few games this evening, Daniele, I'm forced to have the basketball on before the 10 p.m. watershed, which is pretty amazing. Clippers currently 16 points up. The Giannis Antetokounmpo-less Milwaukee Bucks, who won't be extending their season beyond next month. But we're going to talk about the big guys. You're really gagging for Danny, aren't you? Now I'm talking about NBA. I'm so sorry, listeners. But look, we're going to talk about the big guys. We're going to start with Spain. A lot of people's favourites for this World Cup already, the current European champions, and they absolutely brushed aside Serbia. It was no contest, Daniele.
In Villarreal, all'Estadio della Ceramica, 3-0 for Spain against Serbia. They keep winning no matter how they play, no matter who they play. And most of the time they play brilliantly. 29 wins in the last 38 games for Spain. Only one defeat in that run. And against Serbia, it was easy, was comfortable. And the thing that impresses me the most, that since the final in Berlin against England in 2024, Luis de la Fuente, the manager, hasn't been able to repeat the same starting 11, but the outcome has not changed, even if sometimes they miss Yamal or sometimes they miss Nico Williams. This time they got back Rodri, who played the first game for Spain in the last 18 months. But the star of the show was Mikel Oyarzabal, or you can call him Mr. Reliable. He scored twice against Serbia to take his Spain account to 24 goals. Among the active players, only Spanish active players, of course, only Alvaro Morata scored more goals, 37. And what a great season is Oyarzabal having, already 22 goals this season for club and country. It is one of those that I feel if he was from another nationality, or if he was playing for another club, we'll be talking much higher ways about him. Anyway, if he scores in the next game, which Spain are going to play against Egypt, he's going to set a new record. 6 goals for Spain in 6 consecutive games. So I think that would be really incredible for him. But yeah, Spain overall look the business. And, when you are the favorite, you need to earn the badge. And I think Spain are doing it right so.
Yeah, Oyarzabal is relentlessly unfashionable, isn't he? Despite being a winning goal scorer in a major tournament final. 29 next month. I think we'll have to ask, will he ever leave Real Sociedad? But a lot more speculation surrounding the future of the guy who scored the 3rd goal, Victor Munoz, who has been really, really good for Osasuna this season. Now, of course, came from La Fábrica, the Real Madrid academy. And they've got an interesting little deal there because he has a very high buyout clause around the €80 million mark. But Real Madrid have the preferential buyback on him. So they could buy him back for €8 million this summer and either integrate him into the squad or use him as transfer collateral, perhaps. It would actually only cost them $3 million because Osasuna still owe them $5 million from the original deal. So it got me thinking, Daniele, it's kind of comparable to the situation they have with Como, Nico Paz, who's been out there for a couple of seasons. They've got quite a favourable buyback for him. Jacobo as well, the centre-back who's over there as well. And not only does this tell us how many good players that the Real Madrid academy is producing, but either they've got the opportunity to become a lot younger, and maybe that's something that they'll lean upon if Alvaro Arbeloa stays the coach, because we've already seen how he likes to blood young players like Thiago Pichach, for example. Or they're going to have an ability to create a lot of money to go out and spend on big guys in the transfer window.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum and an interesting situation to be in it, of course, because I think it's a win-win for Real Madrid. Let's take Nico Paz, who, by the way, scored for Argentina his first senior goal with a free kick in a friendly last week. If they buy him, they buy a very good player that I think could play for Real Madrid. Of course, if Arbeloa finds space for him in such a lineup that they have. If they buy him for a relatively cheap price. They can keep him, or they could sell him even for more. So therefore, they're going to make a gain. If, for example, they sell him back to a Serie A club, Inter will love a player like him, for example. The same goes with Munoz. Could he start for Real Madrid? Maybe not right at the moment. It's not an area where they really need to strengthen. But if they sell it for more, as long as they don't sell it to a direct competitor, like the likes of another Spanish club, for example, or one that goes for Champions League title, then of course it's a big game for them. And I think that goes to show that sometimes instead of loaning players, having this sort of agreement could be even more beneficial for a big club like Real Madrid.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. All good for them and all good for us watching Switzerland versus Germany, a 7-goal thriller that Germany got the better of. Now, we could talk about the to and fro of the game, but really we want to be talking about Florian Wirtz. I mean, an interesting situation for him, Daniele. 2 goals and 2 assists in this game. There's always been the feeling over the last couple of months that he's really getting to the pitch of the Premier League and finding his best, and he'll be the player to leave Liverpool forward. But you know, I wonder if he does that for Germany this summer as well, because there are doubts over where they are in midfield. Now, Julian Nagelsmann was talking today about Felix Metscher and how of Borussia Dortmund and how he might not be fit for the tournament. We'll wait and see. But I'm thinking back to Euro 2024 when you had that very Red Bullish 4-2-2-2 with the twin number 10s of Musiala and Florian Wirtz, and that worked brilliantly together, by the way. But it might be that if Musiala isn't fit enough, and there are real questions over that at the moment, interestingly, they've given the numbers, all of the numbers out, apart from the number 10, which they're keeping for Musiala, should he come back, and they hope he will come back. But I guess we have to ask the question, is it just fine if they run it all through Wirtz?
Well, on what we saw in Switzerland, probably it would be, and perhaps it could give Germany's midfield a little bit more of protection if Nagelsmann decides to play with a midfield three, which he didn't, by the way, against the Swiss. And perhaps that's where the imbalance came, because he played with Kai Havertz as a focal point that really didn't have a great game, to be fair. And then Gnabry and Leroy Sané on the wings, of course, supported by Wirtz. They looked a little bit unbalanced, so I wonder if another midfielder there could have been perhaps more useful, and maybe if it's not Musiala, then a midfield three when you have Goretzka and another two, given that although Metscher is injured, that he might be out for longer than expected. But going back to Wirtz, definitely the best game of this season so far. A good news for Liverpool fans, which probably gonna see more of these performances coming forward. But of course, it begs the question, why hasn't he done it for Liverpool at this level and consistently? Probably there is also a pressure issue there, and the fact that Liverpool themselves are not having a great season. But yeah, for what we've seen against Switzerland, yeah, the performance of a talent that we know it's there, of course, just needs to be unleashed.
In fairness, Robert Pires didn't have a great first 6 months in the Premier League, and he turned out okay, I suppose. Of course, Pires could have played for Portugal, and we would have loved to see him play for Portugal last night, during the middle of the night. Mexico 0, Portugal 0. I've deliberately allowed us a really short time to talk about this, Daniele, because it was a full-on game. It was quite a physical game. In terms of goalmouth action, not a lot going on. That sort of Carabao Cup lineup picked by Roberto Martinez, a sort of half and half. A lot of those players who will be involved, but some of them won't be first 11ers once it really starts. But it was interesting to me that Gonzalo Ramos was talking afterwards of PSG, was talking about what a great experience it was to speak in the Azteca, but how the travelling had made them really weary, and he found it quite difficult to breathe during the game because it's often overlooked. Mexico City, of course, it's brilliant to play in the Azteca, but 2,200 metres above sea level. This is going to have an effect at the tournament, no?
Oh, absolutely. It is going to be one of those places that teams perhaps they don't want to play, or they will not really relish to play, especially in the opening stages of the World Cup. But yeah, someone, of course, will have to play there. So perhaps is a good opportunity for Portugal to get used to the altitude of the game. As you mentioned, was played at a good intensity, but had really very poor finishing. Gonzalo Ramos hit the post. Portugal had a couple of out chances. A Portugal side without both Cristiano Ronaldo and Rafael Leao in the side, both out because of injuries. And for Mexico, the good news, apart from the reopening of the Stadio Azteca, is the fact that they kept the 10th clean sheet in the last 15 internationals. It was a depleted Mexico side, missing up to 12 players due to injuries. So Javier Aguirre had to recall the likes of Raúl Jiménez, even Guillermo Ochoa was recalled, the goalkeeper, although he didn't start it. In the end, Hormiga, well, that's the nickname, of course, the Mexican striker Armando Gonzalez, 23 years old, plays for Guadalajara, probably the biggest prospect of Mexico so far, had a couple of chances to break the deadlock, but yeah, 0-0, and they'll have to do it all over again, Portugal, in a couple of days, because they play the USA, whereas Mexico faces Belgium on Tuesday, so it's quite an intense schedule, especially for the European-based players, of course, who got a lot of traveling. Then when they have to come back with game coming thick and fast.
And to think that they call the international break a break, it's not really, is it?
Yes.
Anyway, we will be moving on to Belgium, Netherlands, Norway and Croatia on the next part here on Trans-Europe Express. Yes, Trans-Europe Express at the moment here on TalkSport. But the breakfast show returns tomorrow from 6 a.m. as Ali McCoist and Gabby Agbonlahor are joined by a host of guests as they look back on another action-packed weekend in the world of sport. That's TalkSport Breakfast with Ali McCoist and former Aston Villa and England striker Gabby Agbonlahor from 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Set your alarms. You won't want to miss it. Another goal in the US, 10 minutes to go in Colombia versus France, and Colombia have pulled one back. Jaminton Campaz, who came on a substitute for Luis Diaz, who just before that got absolutely smashed by Marcus Thuram, for which Thuram got a yellow card. Campaz has pulled one back, so it's Colombia 1, France 3, and it does look quite hot out there, or humid at least. Apparently it's only 15 degrees, but it looks as if the players are sweating significantly. Some of those others who will be sweating significantly this summer include Belgium, Daniele. Now, Belgium went over to the US to play a friendly against one of the host nations, went a goal down, and then hit back hard.
Yes, they won 5-2 in the end. This friendly, which was by far the worst performance for the US team under Maurizio Pochettino, and was by far the biggest kit clash ever, if you've seen it, because they both played in a sort of blue and white stripe. I mean, the untrained eye would not have guessed who was who. Belgium were wearing the second strip, US were wearing a sort of American flag strip. Anyway, in the end, Belgium won convincingly with a good performance in the second half. Pochettino, the US manager, said that was a reality check for his team. And in fact, the US haven't played team of the caliber of Belgium just yet. And after a good first half, the US lost composure. Then the goalkeeper, Matt Turner, was at fault for a couple of goals. And the big question mark for the US is, of course, can they compete with elite opposition? And what's happening to Christian Pulisic? Not being able to leave a mark. A stark contrast to the beginning of his season with AC Milan and of course, the national team. Scoreless Pulisic in the last 13 games for club and country, no goals with the US in the last 7 matches. You feel that if he doesn't turn up, really, one of the three host nations are going to have a very, very poor tournament. For Belgium, good performances from Doku. I think in the end, the US defense couldn't live with Manchester City winger. Couple of goals from Dodi Lukebakio, especially the first one, a very sweet curler from outside of the box. And then the Catelare, De Bruyne, Salemakers, all in tune. Belgium now unbeaten in 10 games. So, yeah, a very good preparation, considering they were missing a few players, Lukaku, Trossard, Van Aken, Courtois. So, yeah, Rudi Garcia must be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, no one's expecting anything of Belgium at this World Cup, are they, Daniele? And I think the interesting thing is, I would have said before the start, and I guess even a couple of months ago, that you think about the wide players led by Doku. Of course, Malik Fofana's coming back from injury, not quite there yet. That is really where their strength lies. But if you wanted to make that argument, this game made that argument for you. Now, Dodi Lukebakio, as you said, the one of those wide players who's most likely to score you a goal, I think it's fair to say, maybe who won't be totally gassed by the end of the season because he spent quite a chunk of this one out through injury. Of course, Jose Mourinho's been quite frustrated to lose him at Benfica. Mourinho absolutely loves him and the feeling's quite mutual. Also, Mika Hutz from Ajax, who is a goal scoring. He's more of a wide forward, I suppose, than a winger. He made his first appearance, having been one of the rare up points from Ajax's season.
Yeah, he did. And it's a team that is changing, of course. It's an evolution of the golden generation that has vanished through the years and underperformed to a level, and Rudi Garcia is evolving it into a more possession-based team, perhaps pressing less intensely as they were used to. But it will be interesting to see if, with such an array of talent in wide areas, Garcia chooses to stick with Romelu Lukaku, who's of course Belgium all-time goal scorer, although he comes on the back of a disappointing season where, again, he's been out for most of the time and not been able to leave a mark on Napoli's campaign so far, or whether he prefers to go with a different setup with the likes of Trossard or the Catelere playing as a number 9, so having Belgium be more able to retain possession also in the forward areas.
Yeah, talking of having your mind up made by absentees, no Martin Ødegaard or Erling Haaland for Norway in their trip to the Netherlands in Amsterdam. 2-1 for the Netherlands in the end after Norway took the lead through Anders Schjelderup. And he's an interesting one, Schjelderup, because, of course, we're always talking about Norway's attacking players. Schjelderup on the come-up at the moment, and if Anatoly Trubin hadn't scored that header against Real Madrid, we'd probably be talking about that Benfica game against Real Madrid as a Schjelderup game, because they were just getting ready to sell him to Club Brugge. Then he came in, scored 2 goals against the frequently European champions in that game, and he's built from there. And now he's got a brilliant opening goal in the senior team for Norway. So very encouraging for them in terms of their squad.
Yeah, and Schjelderup is a player that is very versatile. He can play across all the position in behind the strikers, centrally on the wide areas. So again, he's another weapon that such a high-scoring side as Norway. They were the teams that scored the most goals in the European qualifiers for the World Cup. Will have a defeat against Netherlands away from home is a game that, you know, it's okay. It's something you can take into account, considering also the absences and the fact that the Dutch looked fired up. You know, they are in a good run of form as well. They are unbeaten since a year, since 2025, when they lost in the Nations League against Spain under Ronald Koeman, and they managed to overturn the deficit first with Virgil van Dijk scored a header, and then with Tijani Reinders teed up by Denzel Dumfries, a game where Ronald Koeman made a few experiments, gave the debut to 20-year-old AZ Alkmaar talent Kes Smith, then also played the Teen Cup Miners on the right-hand side, again another position that he has filled Teen Cup Miners this season, but up front Gakpo and Malen. It was a very good game, very watchable against two teams that might surprise many at the World Cup. Of course, I'm sure Norway is everyone black horse, but, you know, careful with this Dutch side as well. They do look more solid than they used to be in the past in previous tournaments, I think.
Yeah, that'll be a biggie in the groups as well. Netherlands' middle game, which I think is in Houston, is going to be against the winners of that playoff between Sweden and Poland. So that'll be an interesting one. Also, some beautiful tributes paid to Johan Cruyff at the Johan Cruyff Arena. Of course, 10 years anniversary of his death. Very much missed on every level of European football. But let's look to the future. And Colombia, they're playing at the moment. They're 3-1 down to France, still with 5 minutes left. They've already played a game in the US where they took the lead really early on, but Croatia came back to win 2-1. And at last, we're getting some younger talents coming through for Croatia. Look, let's get it out of the way at the top. Let's talk about Luka Vuskovic. Danny would want that, of course. And look, we're not going to project too far ahead and say that Vuskovic might be the captain of a team that wins the EFL Championship next season. We're not going anywhere near that, okay? We're just going to stay well away from that. I was going to say. But whether Spurs decide to flip him because they know that he's got a big value at the moment, or decide to hold on to him, there's a player there, isn't there? And he got the equaliser in this. Only just turned 19. Injury notwithstanding, he's going to be a huge player for whoever he plays for next, and for Croatia for a very long time, isn't he?
Yeah, this season at Hamburg has been the best player with a distance. The way he reads the game, he's quick, he's commanding in the air. He's a typical, he's a modern centre-back, really, that is good in both boxes as well. And
but it's the personality, isn't it, as well, don't you think?
Yes, personality as well.
Yeah.
And, to lead the Hamburg defense, a newly promoted club, historical club in Germany, but still newly promoted, and steering the club with other players, of course, to a mid-table position, so they look quite saved at the moment, I think is a big achievement. Last night he scored, his shot was deflected, but Croatia conceded after 2 minutes, and after 5 minutes they had already equalized thanks to Vuksovic, and they had a good game. Croatia, they are always gonna be there. They are the masters of the tight margin. When a game is tight, you don't want to play against Croatia. Because they will probably beat you, and that's what they did yesterday against Colombia. They only had 3 shots on target. They scored with 2 of them, although in the second half Petar Musa hit the post twice, so they could have had a better scoreline in the end. Colombia had the fair deal of chances. Luis Suarez from Sporting Lisbon missed an open goal. An incredible goal, really, served by Luis Diaz. He only had to push the ball into the net. But it was, again, one of those games where Croatia just edged it because of the better experience. 9 games without defeat for Croatia, which, look increasingly younger. They got some good talents there again. I think they will be one of those competing for to go far in the tournament.
I agree with you, Daniele, and to give you 30 seconds on this, there'll be a few names in the Croatia squad that people are not that familiar with, and that's something that's quite new for us. We go into a World Cup and we know all the players now. It's not like watching it when we were kids, is it? But one of them I think that might have slipped under the radar is Martin Baturina. Tell us a bit about what he's done for Como this season, briefly.
Martin Baturina has helped Como to rise their level even more than what they were already doing, to even a better level since he started playing regularly. He plays on the left-hand side, but he's not a pure winger. He's actually more of a midfielder, and he plays in that position because Cesc Fabregas, the manager of Como, likes to have a ball-playing winger that comes inside, that has got such a great first touch, that can play even between the midfielders or behind the striker. So he's extremely mobile and extremely versatile. He's a player that perhaps in the past has excelled on take-ons and dribbles. Now in Serie A is more cagey, so he does it less, but he rarely loses the ball, rarely gives the ball away. Already scored 5 goals in this calendar year, and he shoots from distance. He drives at defenders. He gets defenders to commit fouls on him. He gets defenders to get booked, to get sent off. But again, he's got that intelligence of sometimes coming inside the pitch, exchanging passes with his teammates, and he's really added a new dimension. So I think, again, with a player of such a versatility, Como are blessed to have him if they can keep him for a little bit longer next season when they will play in Europe. And I think for Croatia, he's one of those that really is going to excite us at the next World Cup.
Yeah, it sounds Croatian to me. That is the first hour of Trans-Europe Express. It's a whirlwind every week, no different this time. Club football next, here on TalkSport.
Liverpool have announced on Tuesday the cost of attending a match at Anfield is going to increase. It's going to go up by 3% next season, following further increases in line with inflation over the next two campaigns. They've decided to do this despite consulting with the Liverpool FC Supporters Board, a decision which was firmly opposed by fan leaders. Liverpool have revealed that adult general admission tickets, which currently cost £39 to £61, are going to rise between about £1.25 and £1.75. Adult season tickets, priced at £713 to £904, will increase by £21 or £27. They say the cost of junior tickets and local general tickets available to those with a Liverpool postcode would remain frozen. Fenway Sports, though, the owners of Liverpool.
More green jackets have been lost at the 12th than at the Augusta City Dry Cleaners. Rory McIlroy knows this better than most. But what is Amen Corner and why is it so iconic? The famous sequence has always been there since the Masters began in 1934. It didn't get its name until '58, though, when American sports writer Herbert Warren Wint, on the left, wrote, "At the farthest reach of the Augusta National Course, down in the Amen Corner." He drew inspiration from the 1933 jazz song Shouting in That Amen Corner by the Dorsey Brothers. The reason behind its difficulty is all in the sand and the water. Tournament officials don't even bother to count the balls lost in there each year, such is the sheer number. The 11th, named White Dogwood, is a downhill 520-yard par 4 with a pond to the left of the green and a bunker to the right. Both cause a lot of trouble each year. The 12th, Golden Bell, is perhaps the most famous hole in the world, with danger everywhere. Many aim for the flag, but look, get it even slightly wrong and you're in the azaleas at the back, or the bunkers at the front, or even worse, Rays Creek. Or you can play it safe and aim for the open green on the left. You chicken. Tiger Woods once said, if you make 4 bogeys from Thursday to Sunday, you're doing well. And the highest ever score on that hole? 13. It's a par 3. Tom Weiskopf in 1980 was the sorry soul. Often the iconic Ben Hogan Bridge is the only thing players enjoy about Golden Bell. Even if you escape there unscathed, though, you met with Azalea, the dogleg par 5 13th. It tempts players to go for the green in 2, but cut over those trees on the left at your peril. Every year, it seems, Amen Corner destroys someone's dreams. Rory McIlroy dropped 3 shots through here as his round unravelled in 2011. In 2016, a year after navigating Amen Corner expertly, Jordan Spieth shot a quadruple bogey on the 12th to throw away his green jacket. I mean, it sounds like my game, to be honest. So who'll be the next to be brought to their knees, praying for mercy after Amen Corner?
Sunday night on Talk Sport, it can only be Trans Europe Express with me, Andy Brassell, and the brilliant Daniele Fisichella beside me this evening. We're going to be talking about club football, again, moving away from internationals in the second hour. So we're going to be talking about John Blinkentexter, even though I don't really want to. We're going to be talking about a couple of my favourite players getting injured. One of my favourite players, Antoine Griezmann, leaving this show. He's been with us for the whole 10 years. He's going off to the United States, of course, and we're going to be talking about everything in Serie A. A lot happening. But first, we've got a special guest. We're going to be joined by French football writer and author Philippe Auclair as we discuss a certain French striker. It's time for this.
Sa carrière, le Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappé! Mbappé!
Little give and go, Mbappe's in! Oh, it's 2-2! He scored twice in 2 minutes!
Tête de Kylian Mbappé. Allez, Kylian!
Yeah, Kiki's feeling a little refreshed because he did not take part in Colombia 1, France 3, which has just come to a close in the US now. You'll notice, Philippe, that we left it just for the game to finish, so you could finish off watching it before you join us. Thanks so much for making the time. You are the author of the Mbappe project, Making a Superstar. Tell us about what inspired you to write it in the first place, because it's a fascinating book and it's not so much about the player, but about the structure around him.
Yes, I mean, I think but first of all, thank you very much for having me, Andy and Daniele. And the thing really that got me going on that book was the fact that Kylian Mbappe is absolutely unique in the way he controls his own career and the way that he's not just an exceptionally gifted player. And by the way, he played a few minutes against Colombia, but didn't do anything much. He nearly scored.
Blinken, you miss him.
He missed from a tight angle. There was a player on the line who defended anyway. But it's the way in which he's been able to control his whole career and to become a megastar, and he certainly is a megastar, in his own terms, surrounded by a very small entourage of people, his family and a couple of close advisors, and that he's created something which is quite unique, very different, for example, from what has happened to Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, because he's not of the same generation. He comes from a generation where players, I mean, Ronaldo and Messi come from the pre-Instagram, pre-Twitter, universe that we bathe in, whether we like it or not. Whereas Kylian is very much part of that environment. But it's just the way he's built his career, which is, for me, absolutely fascinating. Doing a biography wouldn't make much sense when he's only 27 years old. He's not the Champions League winner yet. He's not a double World Cup winner yet. All these things. But on the other hand, the way he's got to where he is now is an extraordinary story to tell, fascinating in so many details.
Philippe, by reading your book, I've learned many things that I didn't know, because you debunk a few myths in the first pages of your book. First of all, you debunk the myth that Mbappé comes from a poor background, a deprived background, a banlieue, a dangerous place, which is not true. It could have been anywhere in France, and probably that's a wrong narrative. And also, you do debunk another myth, that the fact that, yes, he was helped and encouraged and supported by his family. That's why you call it a project itself. But it's not the typical story of pushy parents that shout and film every single moment of the kids on the pitch. It's quite the opposite. So it's more about led by nature rather than nurture.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the environment, I mean, Bondy is in the French banlieue, and there are parts of Bondy which are perhaps a little bit rougher than others. But he comes from a family which had a decent income. He could holiday in Dubai when he was a teenager. He was given a little electric car when he was only 6 or 7 years old, so he could go to training sessions like a proper star, you know. He had his first sponsoring contract when he was only 8 years old with Nike, and had boots and shirts and everything. And basically, he was what I would call lower middle to middle class, not affluent, but very, comfortable environment. Went to private school. He didn't. Some of the friends he had in Bondy were friends who lived in much rougher backgrounds, but that was not the case with him. And when it comes to his family, you're absolutely right. That the fact that we all think about these pushy parents who are there on the sidelines, on the touchline, screaming at referees, screaming at their kids, and actually bullying their children. And I talk about some examples of that in the book. But in his case, everything was done with his agreement. And more than that, every single decision that he took in his playing life was taken primarily by himself. Even when he was a teenager, he was always asked to give his opinion. When they decided to turn down Chelsea and Real Madrid, which they did when he was only 13 years of age, he was part of the conversation. So it's very atypical, and that's the thing, is that he's exerted a degree of control over his career, which is quite extraordinary, which can also perhaps explain why there have been so few bumps in the road for him, because it's a very linear, very fluid progression, which everybody had predicted since he was, 6 or 7 years old, because he was so good so early. But they've done everything, his family and himself, to ensure that the progress would be as fluid and as accident-free as possible, and they've succeeded in that.
Yeah, in terms of that non-pushy parent thing, Philippe, it recalled a little bit the excellent book by our own Lars Sivertsen on Erling Haaland, where he talks about the fact that he wasn't streamed, he wasn't put with all the other hothouse with all the other great kids from the beginning, and maybe that helped him become a more rounded player. So maybe this sort of bucks a little bit the idea of what makes an elite footballer, which I think is really interesting if you're talking about two of the best, if not the best players in the world at the moment. The other thing that sort of sprung to mind, a couple of things that sprung to mind, really when you're talking about him being so polished as a product, if we go away from the football bit a minute, it really brought to mind two things for me. Firstly, I remember going out to interview him for TV when he was still at Monaco. So this was like 2017, I guess. It would have been approaching the semi-final with Juventus when they're on the way to winning Liga. And he was cordial, charming, polite, funny, but slightly distant, which I thought was really remarkable. He seemed, as a teenager, really in control of all of it. The other thing that really sprung to mind for me is when he was in, I think it was his first or second year at PSG, when he was always being nicknamed Donatello, wasn't he, after one of the Ninja Turtles?
Yes, that's right,
and Thiago Silva got him this Dior box and gave it to him in the dressing room, and he said it was from all the players, and he opened it and it was a Donatello mask, and everyone in the dressing room is absolutely killing themselves laughing, and Mbappe's just like he's laughing, but he's really smiling politely in a way that kind of sets him apart from the other players. Now, you paint a picture, I guess this is in common with a lot of other big footballers, that he doesn't seem to have a lot of close friendships in the game. Is that fair?
No, that's completely fair. I think Nordi Mukele is, and perhaps Achraf Hakimi, two of the players who are closer or closest to him, but he has very few friends. And one thing which is really quite, I wouldn't say strange, because that's a result of the way that he's pursued his career, but he has kept absolutely no friends from school and from Clairefontaine, none.
Right.
And that's very telling. Is that he's always been in a part of a different universe, a kind of a universe that the others, it's not the mere mortals, it's also the way that he speaks. It's the way, as you talk about his education, the fact that he's got this distance with people. He's very courteous, very polite, and can be very funny too. But there's always this. It's very clear that you're not going to go past a certain stage in your relationship with him, and I think that applies to the players as well that he shares a dressing room with. And I think one of the most telling things is, I talk about that in the book because I was astounded when I learned about that, is the fact when PSG players had to elect their captain and he only came fourth in the vote despite putting his name forward.
Wow.
And that was a player who at the time was their main guy, was the guy who was scoring the goals, making the assists, enabling them to win all those trophies, domestically at least. And he's always been a bit on the outside when it comes to that. He's trying very hard at the moment. I don't know if you've seen him play against Brazil or the warm-ups against Colombia and so forth. He's trying very hard to be very smiley at the moment. For me, he's trying a little bit too hard, but that's just me. Just like he was trying a little bit too hard to celebrate with Vinicius after they did those things to Xabi Alonso at the end of Xabi Alonso's reign in Real Madrid, if you can call that a reign. And there were some very public displays, but you always of affection and closeness, which of course fooled absolutely nobody. But it's part of the character. He's in control. He's managing. Like he managed you when you did this interview with him. He manages his relationship with the media. He manages his relationship with the President of the French Republic, for goodness sake. He manages absolutely every single department, side of his life. His private life, he has no private life. He has no friends, no very close friends. I'm sure, there's this family, obviously, a couple of people who go with him, but he lives in a very strange universe, which he has created himself and for himself, which is this is what fascinates me, is that how can you build your own prison and feel happy?
Yeah,
no,
I suppose that is the question, really, isn't it, Philippe? Before we let you go, we're going to have to ask you, after these two great results on tour, briefly, how confident are you for the summer?
I'm not confident at all, despite the fact that I was. Well, I am. I do feel that this World Cup is probably England's, but that's me. And people will say that's a hex, and the Romans would say it's a double hex. But I do think England has got some absolutely phenomenal arguments to use. And also, I'm not absolutely sure that Didier Deschamps will take made the right choices. Though I have to say, I am much more cheerful right now than I was 2 hours ago, because what I've seen from the so-called B team was at times absolutely beautiful. And I mean absolutely beautiful. Cherki, Akliush together, my goodness, that's a dream. And I have to say that, and I think you too, and Daniele, you will be with me on this one, but seeing this French team playing in that kit just makes my heart melt, because that's the kit of 1982.
Yes.
Blue shirt, white shorts, red stockings. That's the way we should be playing every single game. We look better, and we play better in that type of kit anyway. And it looks great under the light, the kind of almost Mexican light that we got this afternoon in Washington. And so that looked fantastic. But I think this was very much a few hours spent in the land of fantasy, and that we will come down to earth with a bang when Deschamps is back in charge with the A team, with Kylian in it, and the serious things start. And I'm not that confident. I know that everybody else is confident for the French, but I am not that confident myself.
Well, at least the light's going to be beautiful. That's what we know, Philippe.
That's
Look, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. That's Philippe Auclair, the author of the Mbappe project, Making a Superstar. And, of course, you can listen to the latest episode of How to Win the World Cup with Matt Ford and Alex Brooker speaking to former England skipper Stuart Pearce all about defenders ahead of the World Cup this summer and why having a strong defence will always be more important than having a strong attack. That's How to Win the World Cup podcast, available now on the TalkSport app or your favourite podcast provider.
Join us now to look ahead to all British heavyweight boxer Dillian Whyte. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Dillian.
Good morning, good morning. How's everything been? Good?
Yeah, good, mum.
Yeah, really, really good. You gutted for the Welsh last night for no reason whatsoever? Or is it just Gabby who's hammering them?
I have no comment.
Dillian, what are you thinking about this fight then? You fought both fighters, Itoma and Franklin. What are you expecting from Franklin in this fight?
I think it's a good fight. It depends on what Franklin turns up because, you know, he can turn up and put on a good show and be a really good fighter. Sometimes he can turn up and be a little bit of a stinker, you know. Obviously, he's coming off a loss in his last fight. But I think that's made him hungrier for this fight. And now, obviously, we look at Mosley thinking, if I beat Mosley, I get one up on Dillian because Dillian beat me and Mosley beat Dillian. So I think he's got double motivation. So, yeah.
How good is he, Itoma? You know, only 21 years of age, and we've seen his rise so far. How good is he, and how good can he be?
He's very good. Obviously, they're managing properly and maneuvering properly, and obviously, he's, timing is everything in every division. We have to wait and see. He's very good. He's young. He's active. Obviously, he's explosive and stuff, but we have to wait.
Sunday night, Trans-Europe Express, Andy Brassell, Daniele Fisichella with you all the way through till midnight. And as I might have mentioned earlier, a few little adjustments to the show tonight. I'm going to stop myself banging on about NBA, but what I have allowed myself, maybe we'll get to a Cardi watch in the future. We'll wait and see. But for the moment, I'm just bringing Liga out of the little corner it gets stuck in at the end of the hour. That's right, because we're starting our club football hour, having had that fascinating conversation with Philippe. We're following on from Mbappe to France. And we've got to start with the big story of the week, Daniele, and it's a fixture complaint, of course, because we knew that the big game, which could have been a title decider between Lens and Paris Saint-Germain, was set for Saturday, April 11th, in between the two legs of Paris Saint-Germain versus Liverpool. It has now been moved, but Lens are not happy about it. So just to briefly explain, you may be saying, well, this isn't a big deal, of course, because there was already the movement between the two Chelsea games of the game between PSG and Nantes, which is going to be played April 24. Well, actually, this is a little bit different because this time they got the okay from Nantes to move that PSG, but Lens said, no, we don't want to move this fixture. This is pivotal to our season. They came out, gave a long quite angry, but also quite eloquent statement where they said, look, we're the club with the 10th budget in the league and PSG have got the first by some distance and they've got every advantage. It shouldn't just be that French football is run for the biggest teams. And I think a lot of people out there would agree with that. But the LFP, the league, can pull rank once a season. So they've done that. They've moved the game to May 13th. So it will be the penultimate game of the Ligue 1 season. And by that point, in terms of the title race, it might not even matter, Daniele.
Yeah, the title race might be wrapped up. And I feel, apart from the Lens fans, also the Liverpool fans might feel aggrieved with that, of course, because it's an extra rest for PSG, but nothing to do, of course, with what can Liverpool do in this case. Look, it has happened before. And, you know, in order to be fair, we also have to say that also Strasbourg game against Brest has been postponed to help Strasbourg prepare better for the Conference League quarterfinals against Mainz. So, of course, the French Federation might say, we're trying to help our clubs do as best as they can in Europe so they can return us maximum point for the coefficient. Hence, the league is going to benefit because we might have more teams in Europe in a season or two, which is a logic that holds. But of course, when it comes to PSG, who is one of the richest clubs in the world, doesn't quite really stick together. The beauty of this sport and the beauty of competing for multiple competition is that at some point you're going to have a fixture pile-up and you have to deal with it. Having a big squad means you can deal with more fixtures than your opponents. Lens doesn't play in Europe because last season they were not able to qualify. Hence, they build a smaller squad that can compete in just one or two competitions. And by the way, the fact that the PSG game gets postponed for Lens now creates a fixture pile-up for them because they will have a French Cup semi-final to contend in between the game with the Ligue 1 champions PSG. So then the coin is flipped in this case. Let's not forget, Lens are 1 point behind PSG, and they have proven 3 seasons ago they can take PSG up until the last game of the season. They were very close to win the league. Of course, this is a very much changed game. So it is a difficult situation. And something that has happened before, of course, last season, PSG had their game against Nantes postponed in between the Aston Villa ties in the Champions League, which of course helped them to qualify. But back then, the league was already wrapped up. If you look at Portugal, this season, already Sporting Lisbon and Sporting Braga had their games postponed before the return leg of the round of 16, in which they produce amazing comebacks to beat Bodo Glimt and Ferencváros respectively. So clearly, it goes to show that having rest helps. There is no substitute for rest. There is no substitute for a good night's sleep instead of one full of adrenaline after a match. And this is the beauty, if you like, of having an 8-team league, an 18-team league. But now I put the question to you, Andy. Would you imagine Bayern Munich asking for a postponement of a Bundesliga game if they were to prepare a quarterfinals against anyone in Europe?
No, you wouldn't. And I think this really describes a lot about French football. The fact that the coefficient argument, I think, is actually quite a convincing one. But having said that, I think Ligue 1 has too often privileged the stars over competitiveness. And I think really it's got into that funk, partly because of the domination of PSG. But in a time where the TV rights in France have had no lower value ever. Of course, they've had to move towards this Netflixification of domestic French TV football. Really, you'd think that they'd seize on the chance of having a great title race, like to create the idea that there actually can be a competitive race for the title, I think is extremely valuable to Ligue 1 as a product. Because I think if you ask 10 people in the street, who know a little bit about football, what do you think of the French league? They'd probably go, not much. PSG win it by 25 points every season, which is not true. But that is the perception. And I think to be able to buck that perception, to be able to have a team that, as we say, have the 10th budget in the competition to actually take on PSG, whatever the talk about the physical load on them and all the rest of it. And, you know, of course, they're better equipped to deal with that than most. I think it's a real shame and it's a real missed opportunity for Ligue 1 to keep this a really ethical and reasonable title race. Talking of ethical and reasonable, let's talk about John Textor. He never leaves us alone, does he? Of course, no longer the president of Lyon, but his Eagle Football put into admin this week after an application from Aris, their major creditors. So this means that Botafogo, Molenbeek, or not Molenbeek as they're called anymore, Daring Brussels, and Lyon are looking for new buyers. And of course, this follows on from the phantom transfer story that we were talking about last week, where you had Lyon buying these players for Botafogo that never actually played for Lyon. So Igor Jesus, for example, Danilo being another. I mean, it's a weird thing, isn't it, Daniele, where you're looking at a club and you're rooting for the administrator more than the president or ex-president.
Yes, and I think that's where the fans probably lie. That's what the alliance of the fans are with the administrators. You know, the multi-propriety, multi-ownership. It's a very, very difficult model that is borderline unethical. There are teams that do it better than others, but clearly John Textor is one of the worst example of how to run it. The good news, if we look at the French league and in terms of Lyon, is that now once Textor moves away, they are in the green, both on and off the pitch. The debts, the transfer restriction will be lifted, and the team will be freed from that, of course, and they could start building a better future. Of course, on the pitch, these things affect the club who had a good run of results, but unfortunately, now they've hit a bad patch. They're winless in 8 games. They're still locked in the race for the third place with Marseille, 2 points off. They got a few difficult features coming up. So, of course, it always leaves a question mark. What could have been for this team, brilliantly managed by Paulo Fonseca, I think, if they didn't have so many off-the-pitch issues.
And prayers up as well before we leave France for Joaquin Panaché. Of course, the top scorer in Ligue 1 with 16 goals, but did his ACL on his first international call with Argentina. So he's going to be out for the next 5 or 6 months, which will stop Strasbourg selling him to Chelsea at the very least. Now, it's competition time and it's a belter. Just imagine what you do with £20,000. That's right, 20 big ones, because TalkSport are giving one lucky listener the chance to bag 20 grand completely tax-free. Don't miss your chance to win this huge amount of money. Here's how to enter. For your chance to win, text WIN, W-I-N, to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate, or call 0343 418 7260. Lines closed 9th of April 2026, 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus, UK residents only. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talksport.com. So for your chance to win £20,000, text WIN to 83338 now. Bundesliga next, here on Trans Europe Express.
Former Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp has broken his silence on Mo Salah's impending departure from the Reds. Here he is talking to the Anfield Wrap about the legacy that Salah will leave behind.
Unbelievable goal. So he was part of the best front three in world football for a long time and was the one who always had the highest numbers. So that says something. That really says something. It's not easy to be slightly above the other two guys, and they have all their specific skills, but Mo was the one for the last situation. He wanted to have that more than anybody. So Sadio was a mix of both. Like, yes, he wanted to score goals, but he could have played midfield even, so that's his skill set. Bobby was the genius who didn't care about anything and could play absolutely everything, and Mo was so...
Trans-Europe Express, we're off to Germany next, and the Bundesliga. No football, but plenty happening, and not least a change of sporting director at Borussia Dortmund, with Sebastian Kehl leaving after, a 20-year relationship of player, director, general manager, and then sporting director, and not leaving at the end of the season, leaving like stuff in a cardboard box and off he goes, and replaced with someone pretty young, 40-year-old Ole Buch, who is so not well known in German football that he was referred to in lots of reports when it originally came out as Nils Ole Buch, which is his government name, as rappers say. And as he put it himself, no one's called me that since my mum was telling me off when I was about 6. But he's come across from Elversberg with a real reputation for being able to develop players, Daniele.
Yes, he's a great talent spotter who discovered and took to Elversberg, a team that, by the way, he took from the 4th tier of German football to almost the Bundesliga, to a Bundesliga promotion playoff last season, which they eventually lost. And he brought the likes of Nick Woltemade, Fini Kaslani, Paul Warner, and also the signing of Younes Ebtounalib, who arrived at the club in 2025 at Elversberg, and then they sold in January 2026 to Eintracht Frankfurt. At the time of departing Elversberg for Buch, they are second in the Zweite Bundesliga. So, Dortmund are changing the narrative. They've chosen someone outside of the inner circle, someone outside of the Dortmund family, but someone, of course, with a good CV. But the question is, he's gonna be enough, his talent spotting skills, to take the club to the next level? Because here at Dortmund, he will be asked to sign players of a certain level, and he will be asked to improve the chances of a team to win the Meisterschale, which they haven't won since 2012, of course.
But I guess the point is they need to be fresher, don't they? I guess there's the sense that they've moved away from a developer of players. So Bellingham, Haaland seem quite a long way in the past already, and really, you look at them and they're going to freshen up this summer. You look at some of the older players that are going to go, Niklas Süle, who is going to be out of contract at the end of the season, Karim Adeyemi, who they haven't really managed to successfully develop into the superstar that they thought they were going to be able to when they brought him over from Salzburg. He might be on his way as well. Seydou Guirassy is one that's on the block, as we've spoken about in recent weeks. So I guess the interesting thing as well is they want to build around a younger captain. And Nico Schlotterbeck, who, by the way, made 2 terrible errors in that Germany game against Switzerland, a little bit overconfident in possession at times, I think it's fair to say. It looks like he's all set to extend his contract at Dortmund. So we're talking about 14 million euros a year. Now, of course, the fact that Zula's going is going to help to pay a lot of that raise. There's no doubt about that. But also an exit clause of 60 million euros that will be valid from 2027 going onwards. I mean, really, they've had to put in the release clause that they didn't really want to. But did they have to do everything they could to keep Schlotterbeck and kind of build around him?
Yeah, I think it's a good move. He's been reliable and he's a player of proven experience, a German international, yes, albeit his recent mistakes. 60 million euros, I think, is a good close for a defender. If you look at the top defenders in Europe, in Italy recently there have been talks of Barcelona wanting to sign Alessandro Bastoni, and he's valued around 70, 80 million. So I think the valuation of Slotterberg is good, but it's good, I think, to start building from the back and from a proven center defender. You mentioned a few players that are going to depart, but, with Dortmund and the likes of Felix Mecha, currently injured, but of course, defender is going to renew the contract, of course. Emre Can is going to stay a bit longer, and Schlotterbeck, you do feel they do have a backbone they can develop. And of course, the new sporting director, provided that Niko Kovac is safe in his job, third season on, I think that really that's when they need to be more competitive and kick on and give Bayern more of a challenge.
Yeah, bringing it up with Reggiani there, who's really impressed from the start. I don't know if it's a new contract thing with Schlotterbeck making those mistakes, because as soon as Luca Reggiani signed his new contract, he gave an interview with the club channel, said in perfect English how happy he was there, all the rest of it, how happy his family were. And then he had a dire first half against Hamburg, got dragged at half time when they were 2-0 down. Of course, they came back to win that game as well. But not just one for the future, but one for the present. Reggiani, also one for the future and present, another teenager, Said Al-Mala at Köln. We've talked about him a lot this season, the winger, one of the most exciting players in the Bundesliga, and everything that Köln fans hoped that Florian Wirtz would be for them before he hot-footed it to Leverkusen in the middle of the night. Said El-Mala will be going at the end of the season. I think that's most likely. He's had quite a frustrating season because he got called up for the national team by Julian Nagelsmann, and then hasn't got any further than that. He didn't get called for this international break, partly because Lukas Krasniok, the now ex-coach of Köln, wasn't picking him for all those games, although he's weighed in heavily in some of those big games. Now, interestingly, he seems to have agreed in general principle a move to Brighton at the end of the season. But this is resting on something very particular, because part of the reason that El-Mala and his family are willing to trust his future to Brighton is because of Fabian Hürzeler, who's not guaranteed to stay. And interestingly, in another little twist, going back to that Wirtz thing, who would be interested in Hürzeler other than Bayer Leverkusen?
And it comes around. What goes around comes around. And I think Said El-Mala needs to play. And I understand why he wants to put the pen on the paper only if Fabian Hürzeler is there at Brighton, and only if he plays. Exactly. Because this season, as you mentioned, for how brilliant it's been, 9 goals in 26 games in the Bundesliga, it's been also frustrating because he hasn't been played much. But if you look at the attacking metrics, at the attacking underlying data, Said El-Mala averages 1.62 progressive carries ending with a shot per game in the Bundesliga, and 0.39 progressive carries ending with a goal per 90 minutes. These are the best metrics in the Bundesliga for any player, better than Michael Olise, better than Harry Kane, better than Luis Diaz. So that shows how effective he has been for a Köln side that started the season well, but slowly drifted off, hence the sacking of Kwasniok, hence the scrape for relegation. And you wonder, if had he played more, perhaps these numbers could have been even better for a young player, of course, that now plays with the under-21 in Germany. So regardless of how Köln's season evolves, he must play because he looks the business.
Yeah, that's right. And they're in relegation trouble at the moment, having won twice in 5 months, which led to the firing of Krasniok. Now, someone who is old enough to be El-Mala's dad, we talked about him earlier, and he's the subject of our poll this evening. Manuel Neuer turned 40 this week. Now, I don't know what more we can say about Neuer that hasn't already been said, Daniele. To me, the fascinating thing is how he's still at such an incredible level. He's still Bayern's undisputed number one. Of course, out of contract at the end of the season. They have been talking to him about extending that for another year. But a few little question marks of late because he's had this recurring calf injury and he's been taken off a couple of times recently, and he's out at the moment, of course, Jonas Urbig, who is a very definite candidate for his successor. He's been available to them. But I guess when you get injured at this point in your career, everyone's going to start asking, is this the end? The reality is Neuer has played 19 games and he's a better goalkeeper now than he was when he was 35.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He or at least he maintained the same level. I mean, his level of performance haven't dropped down. The fact that he's more injury prone, but he's also been very honest with Bayern because they have agreed to postpone the contract extension discussion to understand for Neuer if he's going to be able to recover, if he's going to be able to play at the same level, and to guarantee a certain commitment. This season he has only played 29 games, which for his standards are not many. Captain clean sheet conceded 27 goals. So, the numbers, of course, are good, but of course he plays in a top team with a top defense. But he was curious because many players have wished him happy birthday. One of them was Gianluigi Buffon, this week, who said, think really well about your next move. When I was your age, 40, I just signed for PSG, which means you don't have to hang up your glove. You can continue to play. And Buffon retired at 45 while he was playing for Parma. But I think that for Bayern, having the opportunity to give more minutes to Jonas Urbig, who looks an accomplished professional, somebody who can take over Neuer. Of course, that allows them perhaps to just slow down a little bit and have time to think alongside Neuer, alongside the captain, how to extend the contract. But should Neuer decide not to continue with Bayern are considering a move for Oliver Baumann, 35 years old, from Hoffenheim. Of course, he's going to be the replacement goalkeeper because Jonas Urbig is going to become the first goalkeeper. So anyway, they're going to be in safe hands, either with Urbig as a first goalkeeper and Neuer, I mean, I don't want to say an understudy, but the second goalkeeper, or with Baumann, I think they're going to be in safe hands. But of course, credit to Neuer for the huge professionalism that he has demonstrated, even in this season that perhaps hasn't gone to the plan.
Yeah, I guess the question is really, and the difference is between Neuer and Buffon, they're very different styles of goalkeeper. Of course, Neuer needs that extra bit of power to come off his line. I don't think he'll be playing at the halfway line much longer as he was in the 2014 World Cup, notably in that memorable game against Algeria. We're off to La Liga next here on Trans Europe Express. Trans Europe Express, Andy Brassell and Daniele Fisichella. Daniele, I'm going to need your support through this next little bit because one of our Trans-Europe Express favourites is leaving us. He's leaving Europe. Antoine Griezmann, it is official, is going to Orlando City and confirming his long-held desire to go and play in the MLS from this summer. Now, of course, Orlando wanted to get him for this this period now. Of course, the MLS transfer deadline was this week. He decided after the Copa del Rey semi-final, where he beat his old club Barcelona, to stay for the Copa del Rey final, which will be against his former club Real Sociedad, which is maybe quite a nice way to win it. I mean, I know we can technically speak about the Champions League because they're still in it. I don't think anyone's expecting them to win that, but I think very few players, Daniele, get to choose their sign-off. But Griezmann's really earned it, hasn't he?
He deserves it because he's been a centerpiece for Atletico Madrid, a centerpiece of Cholismo of Atletico Madrid, and of course also for France. Let's run down his numbers just to remind ourselves of how good he is and what he's done. 211 goals across all competitions for Atletico Madrid. Then he won, of course, the World Cup in 2018, La Liga Player of the Year in 2015-16, third in the Ballon d'Or voting in 2016 and 2018. He played 488 games and counting for Atletico Madrid. And of course, now he's got the opportunity to finish with a trophy. But first, he will face Barcelona 3 times in the space of only 10 days. Yes, twice in the Champions League and in La Liga, now that we come back from this international break before the showdown at La Cartuja de Sevilla against Real Sociedad. How to define Griezmann? Versatile everywhere, an attacking midfielder that could score plenty of goals, an attacker that you could find defending your own box. I don't think Diego Simeone could not have wished for a better player to manage, and the Atletico Madrid fans could not have wished for a better player to witness.
Yeah, that's right. He will be much missed by Atletico fans and by us. A more short-term absence is that of Raphinha, injured on international duty with Brazil. But this is something that could really shape Barcelona's season, isn't it? He's going to be out for the next 5 weeks, Daniele, missing both legs of Champions League quarter-final. But potentially quite good news for Marcus Rashford, who, if it needed any more underlined in England's game with Uruguay, that he's definitely a winger and not a striker now.
Yeah, Barcelona are furious, by the way, and they're preparing formal action against FIFA, and they're probably going to get a compensation around £150,000. So yeah, I don't think it quite compensate for them, because Raphinha is for sure gonna miss the quarterfinals against Atletico Madrid. La Liga, the last few fixtures, of course, they're gonna be decisive. Unlucky Raphinha, because it's the third time this season that he gets injured on his right hamstring. He suffered the same injuries in September, in October, and he was hitting form. He scored a hat-trick against Sevilla, a brace in the 7-2 win against Newcastle. And, for Hansi Flick, this is going to be difficult. Of course, he's got a natural replacement in Rashford, but it's very difficult to replicate the work rate, the finishing of Raphinha in such a congested April schedule. But Marcus Rashford has been excellent when he replaced Raphinha this season. So, of course, now is his opportunity to play those games, starting with Atletico Madrid at the weekend and the Champions League games coming up, really, because Barcelona are in the lead in La Liga, but of course the title is not wrapped up. And for Marcus Rashford, on the left-hand side, really, he needs to own it and to prove once again is the case to Thomas Tuchel that he deserves a place on the plane for the US.
Look, I love Rashford, and I think he's been brilliant for Barcelona in the way that he's fitted in and taken a role, which they made clear to him at the beginning that he was cover for Raphinha and Yamal. But do you know what, Daniele? I think there's actually an argument that on and off the field, in the dressing room as well, because Raphinha is a huge personality in terms of Barcelona. He's really their captain in every way, shape and form. he's maybe their most irreplaceable player. If I was Hansi Flick, I'd feel more comfortable in going into games without Lamine Yamal than I would without Raphinha.
Yeah, I do agree with you because he does offer so much in both phases. It's not just the attacking numbers, it's not just the attacking contributions, the goal and the assist. It's across the pitch, really. It's across the flank. He's the equivalent of Griezmann for Atletico Madrid, if you like. He's a player that really ranges from across the spectrum, from your attacking side, but also beyond. So it is
a culture setter, yeah.
I mean, Rashford is more of an out-and-out winger. Perhaps in the box, Rashford could be slightly more clinical sometimes with his finishing. He's certainly in form, Rashford, and he looks confident. And obviously, the move to Barcelona has benefited him. But yeah, 5 weeks in modern football are a long, long spell, really. And when he comes back, Barcelona might well be out of the Champions League, or he might well be behind Real Madrid. There is El Clásico approaching, so looking at the fixture, he might just make it to play against Real Madrid. So it is a bad one, but of course it's going to affect also Brazil. I mean, getting injured at this stage of the season with 3 months to go and the World Cup coming up is the worst time, because if you don't recover in time, you might not be fully fit for the beginning of the World Cup in mid-June.
Well, there you go, Barcelona fans. If you didn't feel nervous about it before, I'm sure you feel nervous about it now. Big miss. And talking of injuries, Daniele, I wanted to ask you about this YouTube video that Jude Bellingham brought out on his channel this week, which I thought was fascinating. Now, look, we see more and more players trying to take control of their narrative on stuff like the Players' Tribune, for example, letting us behind the curtain on their terms. And this has been happening for a while, especially on socials. But this was really interesting, because it was Jude Bellingham going behind the scenes on his procedure to get his shoulder fixed, which obviously kept him out of the beginning of this season. And he really showed himself at his most vulnerable. So the moments where he was just about to go in from the operation, it was clear he was a little bit scared. But also talking about how that injury had really held him up last season, and about how opponents were targeting him, like trying to either make contact with the shoulder or pull the dressing or something like that. And it puts into context a lot of what's happened for Bellingham at Real Madrid over the last little while, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looked the short documentary looks raw. It looked real. It looks human, and I really appreciate it, because it's a way of getting more into the psyche and the mind of the players. You know, it wasn't the typical marketing operations done to sell shirts or products. No, it was really the life of an injured footballer that needs to go to a surgery, which any one of us would feel and would be apprehensive about. And of course, a professional athlete even more, because they do not know how they're going to come back at the end of it. And it was a way to try to narrate their own stories. You know, often, we as journalists and as fans criticize players or are very quick at giving our own judgments, but perhaps we don't really know what's going on with them. And sometimes the decision to postpone a surgery really can compromise a season, as it happened to Bellingham. And opponents, other players marking him, are well aware of his physical nuisances, and they took advantage of it. After all, it's a cutthroat business, so it really shows what it means for him and for his against him. But I think well done to him to show the vulnerability and that after all, I mean, the human side of it, well, is a human like us. But going back to what, for example, Philippe Auclair told us before about Mbapp and his impenetrability, the way that he sets himself apart and distant from the rest of the players and from us mere mortals. Well, I think Jude Bellingham with this video actually brought us a little bit closer, a little bit together with us. So I do hope fans, England fans coming up, or whoever is going to support him, are going to be a bit more condescending towards him and towards anyone that maybe might go into a rough time, or we don't exactly know the extent.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting, actually. We're talking about the absence of Raphinha there. Of course, Real Madrid 4 points behind in La Liga. Bellingham's still got to come back. Mbappe's still got to get up to full pelt. So this could be a really pivotal moment in the La Liga title race, even though there's that gap and it feels that Real Madrid are at least 4 points worse than Barcelona at the moment. Overall, it'd be interesting to see how that really affects the run-in for the title. Also be interesting to see what happens with Jude Bellingham in terms of England, of course, where he fits in. Of course, his good mate, Trent Alexander-Arnold, not involved and doesn't look like he's going to be involved unless there's an absolute ton of injuries between now and the World Cup. But Bellingham, look, for me, he's the first name on the team sheet after Harry Kane. He's brilliant. And I think it would be a poorer England side without him at the World Cup. But we will see what his run into the season and into the summer in the US, Mexico and Canada looks like. That is the second hour of Trans-Europe Express, pretty much done and dusted. Tim Vickery is on the way to start the third hour. Stay with us.
We're talking all things Harry Maguire. John is a Man United fan. Jonathan?
How are you doing? You okay?
I'm great. Very well, man. How are you today?
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you.
What's that noise? Have you just opened your wallet?
No, you have to excuse me. It's the police going past in Hereford, which means there's probably a cat stuck in a tree somewhere.
Okay. Well, just be careful.
Oh, yeah, I'm being safe, mate. I'm free and all that.
Good, good. Go on, off you go.
Yeah, talking about Harry Maguire. So, I'm a United fan. Has he let the club down on numerous occasions? Yes, he's a bit of a Marmite player. But with regards to England, I can't think of a time he's ever actually let England down.
Yeah, good
point.
point.
Every time he's put an England shirt on, he's always done a job.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest thing.
Would you start him for England?
I'd start him for England, yeah.
You would.
Who would have thought a sporting event's halftime show could have a bigger impact than the game itself? Well, the Super Bowl halftime show does exactly that. In 2024, Usher brought in an audience of 180 million worldwide, the biggest ever in the event's history. But how did singing and dancing get to be the centerpiece of America's biggest sporting event? The first edition of the Super Bowl was held in 1967 when the Green Bay Packers beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Los Angeles. Because of the sheer size of the event, organisers wanted to put on entertainment at halftime for the fans in the stadium. It was a display of marching bands, dancers and pure USA patriotism, and that was the theme that followed for years. In the 1980s, the Walt Disney Company got involved and we started seeing some interesting and questionable displays. But we got our first glimpse of halftime shows to come in '93 when none other than Michael Jackson stunned fans with his 15-minute medley of his own smash hits. When he walked out on stage, he had to wait for the crowd's cheers to die down for about 2 minutes before even starting his first song. Diana Ross, Gloria Estefan, Phil Collins all starred in their own shows, as did Aerosmith, who performed alongside NSYNC. Things got a little bit out of hand in 2004 when Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson produced perhaps the most famous or infamous wardrobe malfunction in history. Shows from the likes of Prince, Lady Gaga and Beyoncé are considered by critics as the best. To give you an idea of the scale of things, Rihanna's 2023 halftime show included roughly 800 people. These ranged from backing dancers to stage crew to camera operatives broadcasting to millions around the world. The whole stage for that show was built in roughly 8 minutes and was broken down and cleared away in the same time. The acts perform for free nowadays, even though the experts reckon it costs around $13 million to put on Rihanna's show. Artists know they'll rocket up the charts in the following weeks. Rihanna's average sales improved by 140% in the months following her performance. The Super Bowl halftime show will be a fixture in pop culture for years to come. So the question is, who next?
Thank you for still being with us on Trans Europe Express here on TalkSport. I'm Andy Brassell. I've got Daniele Fisichella with me. But, of course, you know, Trans Euro tradition demands that we have only one man starting hour 3 with us. Joining us all the way from Rio de Janeiro, Tim Vickery. How are you, Tim?
I'm very well. How are you finding this presenting like, Andy B? It's not as easy as it looks, is it?
It's not, but he's left the chair nice and warm.
Good,
so thank you, Danny. Talking of hot, that would be France over the last couple of days. That win against Colombia tonight, following on from the win against Brazil. Now, a strange game in many ways. I guess you could charitably describe France as efficient, maybe, Tim. What's been the reaction back home to the Brazilian performance?
Not good at all. They do tend to take friendlies ludicrously seriously. Sometimes it's quite touchingly naive, and I would include that with the Confederations Cup, which was a tournament no longer with us, which was really glorified friendlies, and I saw them 3 times, not once, not twice, ladies and gentlemen, but 3 times. I saw Brazil fall over the same hole. Thinking that they had a team that was good to go for the World Cup because they'd won the Confederations Cup. That was one kind of euphoria, one kind of reaction, the euphoria. The other kind of reaction is the one that they had after losing to France on Thursday night. Oh, we're rubbish, we never amount to anything. It's a friendly, for crying out loud. I try and tell these people, March of 2010, Argentina went to Germany for a friendly. They won 1-0. Germany had a grand total of 1 shot on target. 3 months later, they met in the quarterfinals of the World Cup, Germany 4, Argentina 0. Friendly schmendly, especially when you're not at full strength. And Brazil were not at full strength. One of the reasons I think they were defeated was they're playing very, very much a fringe centre-back, Leo Pereira of Flamengo, coming in for his first game. And he's just not a good defender on the ground. And there are virtues in his game, but he's not particularly quick. He's not particularly talented defending. And you look at both goals and you think, well, what on earth is he doing? Brazil with Marquinhos and Gabriel Magalhães, both of whom missed this game, I think is a different prospect. Some things I think there for Brazil to dwell on. And the main thing is the structure of the side. And what Ancelotti wants to do is the front 4. On Thursday, it was Raphinha who came off at half-time. Matheus Cunha, Vini Jr. and Martinelli. The first choice, I think, would be Estevan coming in and Martinelli dropping out. It looks like we might get front 4 against Croatia on Tuesday as well, with both Cunha and João Pedro alongside Luis Henrique, who's an excellent super sub, and Vini. But can you do this? And one thing which will remain untested is, can you do it in the heat in which the World Cup will be played? Because it's a question of mathematics. If you play with a back 4 and you've got 4 up front, you've only got 2 in the centre of midfield. So it needs the front players to work back, and they are prepared to do that. But you are putting a lot of strain on Casemiro, who's 34. And also what we clearly saw, because Brazil were against 10 men for almost the entire second half. Upamecano was sent off. There's not enough pause. It's all rush, heads down, no nonsense, mindless boogie. It's all happening too quick. You know, it needs someone to dictate the rhythm a little bit more. It needs someone to bring those speed merchants into the game at the right times. Now, Brazilian football is not producing many of those players, and that is potentially a role for Neymar, but he's got to show that he can play 3 consecutive games at a high level. Both of those things so far have been beyond him. So I think that is a key question, the structure of the side, and it'll be interesting to see in Orlando on Tuesday how they get on if they pick the front 4 again against Croatia, who weren't at full strength when they beat Colombia in midweek, will almost certainly be at full strength for the Brazil game, and one of the best sides in the world for keeping the ball in midfield.
Look, I know Daniele wants to ask you a question about one of the other South American contenders for a World Cup place. But before we do, Tim, and before we leave Brazil, I did want to ask you, and something Daniele brought up to me earlier, about how much pressure seemed to be put on Casemiro by the formation against France. What should the structure of the Brazilian midfield look like? Because to me, that feels like quite a big question.
Yeah, it is. I think it's the huge question. The alternative would be a third man in the midfield. Danilo Santos, once of Nottingham Forest, who's had a storming start to the year, back in Brazil with Botafogo, did himself no harms. Dynamic left-footed midfielder. He played a really good second half for Brazil. The ideal one, I think, and it's a surprise that he's been left out this time, will be Lucas Paquetá as a third man in midfield, just to dictate the rhythm a little bit. That would mean leaving out one of your front 4, obviously, but that I think is the big alternative that Brazil have. Rather than go with the front 4, go with the 3 in midfield. And it wouldn't surprise me at all that even if they start the World Cup with the 4 up top, once the players get tired, business end of the competition, the games get tougher, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's a move to something a little bit more conservative.
Well, Tim, so 6 teams qualified from South America, 1 to go, and Bolivia, they could make it for the first time since 1994, final against Iraq. They struggled a bit against Suriname in the semi-final. Are they favourites ahead of Tuesday?
No, I think Iraq are favourites, but I think it has done Bolivia the power of good to have come from behind in that game against Suriname. It's a very, very young side, the Bolivian side, really young. And really, there was a point in qualification when they thought, you know what, we better start planning for 2030. This very, very young group, instead have now got themselves within 90 or 120 or 120 plus penalties of making the World Cup. I think Iraq will be the favourites, but clearly Bolivia benefit from the experience of having the game there already. So they're more tuned into the conditions, they'll have more support in the stadium, I'd imagine, and confidence will be flying after having to dig themselves out of a hole. It will, I think, be a very different game from the Suriname game when they left themselves very open to the counter. I think it's going to be much, much more cagey. And the question that hangs over this Bolivia side, away from the altitude of La Paz, is where are the goals going to come from? They won the game against Suriname with a silly little penalty, really. Iraq will defend much better. So that I think is the key question for this game. Where are the Bolivian goals going to come from? And how open, especially as the game goes on, as they start to tire, if they leave themselves anything like as open to the counter-attack as they did against Suriname, I'm sure Iraq will punish them.
Now, I was very fortunate, dear listeners and viewers, to bump into Tim in the flesh for the first time in a while. About a week and a half ago in London, it was not only the linesman that was wearing a suit, he was impeccably turned out. But when we saw each other, and then when I saw the England game on Friday night, I thought, what a shame that schedule didn't allow you to see Marcelo Bielsa at Wembley's. How did he do?
Yeah, indeed. Although I did watch the game from Rio, and I was very glad that I didn't have to sit there in the cold and watch it. I found it quite depressing to see a Bielsa side play that way. And what he wants to do, and he stresses this all the time, I want to play in their half of the field, and I want my team to impose our game on them. Even if they're better than we are, man for man, I want to strangle them in their half of the field. And that has been Bielsa-ism. But this current Uruguay side are in such a rut, and they are so short of confidence that they just don't want to do it. And so we saw them. I think they defended extremely well. But as Bielsa himself would say, they didn't create anything at all, which was a little bit depressing. And I hope they've got Algeria on Tuesday. I hope that they can pick up a little bit more confidence, and we can see something more akin to what Bielsa really wants in the World Cup. But the crisis of confidence, I think, is really, really acute. They've had a dreadful 2 years. The good thing from a Bielsa point of view after that 1-1 draw is that had they taken another shellacking after the 5-1 defeat to the US last time out in November, I really think there was a huge danger that he might get sacked. That now is, we'll have to see what happens against Algeria, because I've no doubt that the Uruguayan FA have lined someone up just in case. But it's Bielsa now at the age of 70, towards the end, to see him associated with a side who, if they get in the other side half of the field, they get a nosebleed. That was quite depressing, because, his entire career has been based on doing something very, very different from that.
What about the reigning champions, Tim? I mean, I guess playing Mauritania is not quite as glamorous as playing La Finalissima against Spain. They won. Can we pick any good apart from the goal from Nico Paz, from the free kick from that game?
The performance of Nico Paz, they were 2-0 up at half-time and much, much better, although they weren't great. And then they made some substitutions, and we'll get to that in a minute. And the second half, they were absolutely awful and really, really, really dreadful. Very, very poor performance. And there's a few shudders there going around Argentina, watching them being that bad against such mediocre opponents. The performance of Nico Paz, it's the first time Argentina have got something out of him. I think he's going to be much, much more important to the national team after Messi goes. And what they really need at the moment is a Di Maria replacement, and they haven't got it, and he's not it. He's not that speed merchant one-on-one situations who always picks the right thing to do in the big games. But it was good to see him just bed in a little bit for the first time, I think, with the Argentine national team. My thoughts watching it were, Julian Alvarez played the first half, and he went off at the interval, and Messi came on. And the conclusion I came away with is we are now in a situation where Julian Alvarez is much more important to Argentina than Messi is, which seems very strange. But Messi, the whole thing overshadowed it a little bit. We still don't know if Messi's going to play the World Cup. This is still an open question. The coach, Scaloni, is saying it's up to Messi. It's up to him to decide. He has that right, and he hasn't decided yet. So the stadium all wants him to do it. It's a kind of loving. And Argentina ruined their second half, really, just trying to tee him up for goals, when they should have been playing normally. But I think Messi now makes sense alongside Julian Alvarez. And you take Julian Alvarez away, and just his all-round talent and the running that he gets through, I think that's now essential to open up space and get Messi firing as well. So woe betide anything happened to Julian Alvarez between now and the World Cup. And so many things have gone right for Argentina since the World Cup. They won the Copa America. They won South America's World Cup qualifiers by a street. They found ways to play without Messi, especially with the Thiago Almada-Alvarez partnership. But, number one, there is no Di Maria replacement. Number two, as Mauritania showed on the counter in the second half, that Argentina defensive unit, it keeps on creaking. And no solutions have really emerged in the 3.5 years since Qatar. So there was plenty for them to worry about. I wonder what the emotional state of the stadium is going to be like Tuesday night against Zambia, because that will certainly, I think, be Messi's last game for Argentina in Argentina. So whether that overshadows the whole World Cup build-up or not, I don't know. But there are always bearing in mind what Argentina are trying to do has never been done before. No one has ever retained the World Cup playing in a different continent. So the bar is set very, very high. And at this moment, although I think they can play some gorgeous stuff when they hit rhythm, at this moment, I wouldn't bet my money. I'd bet some of yours, Danny, but I wouldn't bet any of my money on Argentina retaining the title.
I'm not sure we can bet Danny's money while he's away. I mean, I think that would be really irresponsible.
No, probably not.
So maybe we'll back away from that. But it'll be fascinating to see. And I think from a commercial standpoint, I mean, the World Cup and a lot of people watching the World Cup would absolutely explode if Messi were not to make it. Symbolically, as much as anything, it's really important that he's there. But he's made a whole career out of being taciturn off the field. So you know what? I'm sure we'll find out when he's good and ready. Thanks as always, Tim. We will speak to you again next week. And because we have Daniele, not Danny, here, we will of course be going feet first into Serie A next.
Stefan, the cost of missing out on the Champions League. If I throw four at you here, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester United or Newcastle, missing out in Champions League, who would feel it most?
Yeah, I think Newcastle would definitely feel it the most, just because the base they're coming off is that much smaller. So therefore the proportion that's associated with Champions League football is that much bigger. And they probably did something like £55 million of UEFA money. And then on top of that, obviously had the 5 home games on top, which are, or 6, probably 6 actually, when you, I think they had a playoff. So that's 6 home games on top. I mean, that's obviously very significant. So you're talking about 75 million quid out of revenue of, let's say, 300.
Trans-Europe Express on TalkSport, and time for a Trans-Europe Espresso as we dive into Serie A to wake you all up, because there's so much to talk about despite the fact there's no football on this week, Daniele, or no club football on this week. And we're going to start where it's always happening, at the champions Napoli. Now, I guess after such a difficult season, you would have thought Romelu Lukaku would like a little break. Well, he's decided instead to go back to Antwerp and ramp up his training regime, hopefully to make an impact in the closing weeks of the season. But he didn't ask the club first.
Should have asked Napoli. It would have been a good idea. And now there is an ultimatum. If he doesn't come back by Tuesday, not only will be fine, but he will be suspended for the squad, because Napoli are aware that he needs to recover and to regain top physical condition. Lukaku suffered a bad injury, a leg injury at the beginning of August 2025, and only returned to action at the end of February. Since then, he hasn't really played many minutes. He scored 1 goal, a winner, by the way, a last-minute winner at Verona, but he's been on the fringes. Also because Napoli had done so well without him, with Rasmus Højlund bagging up the goals, that they really didn't need to force him to come back. But the fact that he has left and he doesn't want to come back to the training ground just yet has created a polemic and a little bit of a case. But I think there is more behind it, rather just a misunderstanding. I think Napoli have understood that Lukaku's time at the club it's almost over, that perhaps he's not gonna be there next season. They can't really afford to have him with his huge wages, around 6.5 million euros, sitting on the bench, considering that Rasmus Højlund has done so well. He's younger, at least 10 years younger than Lukaku, if no more, and he was gonna be the man for the future. So I think there is a plan for Antonio Conte to move him out, which could be quite a first for Antonio Conte. Has always been a great fan of Lukaku, but maybe Conte might be move out himself, and for the club Napoli to just say goodbye to the Belgian, who's been great. Last season not only 14 goals but 14 assists, but this season he's not been able really to hit even partially those numbers.
Yeah, and it is harsh to really criticise him, isn't it, Daniele? Because you think he's turning 33 in May. He made his debut for Anderlecht at 16, so he's approaching the point where he'll have been a professional footballer for over half his life. And that is a lot to put in. Now, look, his medium-term aim has always been to finish his career at Anderlecht. I wonder if that could accelerate this plan a little bit, because of course, as we said earlier, when you have a series of physical problems, once you reach a certain age, people ask, is this the point of decline in your career? But I think it's got a little bit past that, hasn't it? And as you say, Napoli, they've always been quite careful in terms of money under De Laurentiis. They can't be spending this much on a guy that's only going to contribute peripatetically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They have seen Lukaku as a short-term fix, and they have seen Lukaku as the totem that would have allowed Antonio Conte to develop his style of play, which he did brilliantly last season, and in fact he won the Scudetto deservedly. But this season, Napoli, which are a healthy club financially, were so quick to snap up Rasmus Højlund with few hours to go to the end of the transfer market, after they'd already signed Lorenzo Lucca a few weeks ago, but it didn't quite work out, which shows you how good are Napoli at doing that sort of business, but also they need to be shrewd and probably decide to move Lukaku over. Now, Lukaku has had a few run-ins with Italian clubs because perhaps he hasn't handled the communication really well. I remember when he was about to sign a contract at Inter in his second spell, he gone missing. He disappeared for over a week, only for the Inter management to try to contact him over the phone and to find out that he didn't want to play for Inter anymore, and in the end he was he had to move to Roma before he actually wanted to go to Juventus. So it would not be the first time that Lukaku's communication hasn't kept in touch really well with clubs, so probably that doesn't bode well for him. But I'm sure whichever way he goes, the Napoli fans will still remember him fondly. After all, he's been, alongside McTominay last season, the man who gave Napoli the first Scudetto of the history.
Interesting as well to see Kevin De Bruyne coming out at the Belgium national camp and saying how upset Lukaku is feeling about things at the moment. We know how close those guys are, as well as being international and club teammates. So it's almost a semi-official statement from Lukaku while he's over there in Antwerp. Oh, what a strange thought that is, by the way. If Napoli hadn't have got Højlund and that have just been left with Lorenzo Lucca, I mean, it's been a difficult enough season. It would have been really tough if that had been the case. As it stands, they've still got a chance of making the top two. Who will definitely make the top two is Inter, of course. They'll be hoping to keep and extend that lead as the run into Serie A goes on. But a lot of thought already going into what's happening for next season, very much like Napoli and Lukaku. And part of that is questions and increasing questions over Marcus Thuram and whether Inter are going to cash in. Now, of course, they signed him for a free from Borussia Mönchengladbach, even if it's quite a big financial package. They didn't pay a transfer fee for him. He's got an 85 million buyout clause in his contract, which is only valid for July, an increasing speculation that a Premier League club like Newcastle United or maybe Aston Villa, although when we're talking about those sort of figures, I really doubt it in the case of Villa, might be prepared to buy him. What would you do if you were Inter, Daniele, and what do you suspect will happen?
If I was Inter, I would move Thuram on. I think he hasn't quite replicated the form of the first season. 15 goals, 14 assists. This season the numbers are quite down. 12 goals, 5 assists. But he hasn't scored a goal, only 1 goal since mid-January. He's not in great form, although people who watched France tonight against Colombia might disagree because he scored a goal and he gave an assist. But in Italy, he has really been down. I think he has lost a bit of sharpness. Sometimes he even looked a little bit disinterested, and his body language has not been extremely positive. Certainly hasn't been very clinical in the last few weeks in front of goal, which explains also Inter goal drought. Also combined to the fact that Lautaro Martinez has not been there, and he does need Martinez to open up the space for him and to make sure then he can use his power and his acceleration in the best way. Thuram has had a good evolution in Italian football. He transitioned from a winger, that he was a Gladbach, into a centre forward, and he's extremely versatile. But I do feel that his time in Italy is probably coming to an end, and he's going to be one of the many players that Inter are going to replace this summer. This summer is going to be a big one for Inter, regardless if they win the Scudetto with Chievo or not. I think there are at least 7 or 8 players, most of them over 30, which Thuram is not, but is getting close to that age, that are going to be moved on. So the likes of Jan Sommer, the likes of Mkhitaryan, Acerbi, could be Thuram. It could be one between Barella and Bastoni. So really, I would not be surprised if Thuram moves. Also because Inter have got Pio Esposito waiting in the wings, which is no longer a prospect. He's an accomplished professional. He's an accomplished player that should start next season. And having somebody like Thuram is only going to arrest his development.
Yeah, they can't block the pathway for him, can they? And also, the fact is, Lautaro is your absolute unmovable. So probably going forward, Pio Esposito and Lautaro at that front too. I'll be really interested to see how Marcus Thuram got on in the Premier League. But it's interesting what you were saying about the declining production this season. And we've seen this sort of fatigue creep in with a lot of Inter players, and I guess with a lot of modern players, and especially someone like Thuram, who spends a lot of time running the channels. I think it's really unsurprising that he's looked uninspired at a lot of stages this season. I think the physical load could be part of it. But talking of uncertain futures, all of a sudden there's a question over Gianpiero Gasperini at Roma. Now, of course, he's only just arrived. I think you could argue that he's struggled to make the team really look like a Gasperini team so far. They're very strong defensively at the start of the season. But the defeats have really been mounting up in the last month or so. And ever since they lost that 2-goal lead to Juventus at the Olimpico and that equaliser by Gatti right at the end, the Champions League race has sort of slipped out of their control. How damaging is this to Roma and to Gasperini if they miss out on a Champions League place?
It is damaging because the aim was to return into the top 4, which also would have brought vital finances and earnings to a club that is already locked into a financial settlement agreement with UEFA, thence cannot overspend and perhaps needs to sell one of the big players, either Manu Kone, Mattias Sule or Miles Villar, the goalkeeper. But Gasperini wants the certainty that this is not just a long-term project like he was at Atalanta, where he spent 8 years, 8 seasons, and eventually established them as one of the top clubs in Europe, winning the Europa League. Gasperini wants certainty that Roma can be competitive already from the second season. In this first season, Gasperini has been very critical of the transfers that Roma have done. He lamented the lack of striker, especially in the first part of the season. He lamented the lack of a left winger, which eventually he got in the January transfer window. And, credit to him, because with Daniel Malen playing up front, which, by the way, he understood Daniel Malen could have been a central striker, whereas at Aston Villa, we always seen him playing off another striker. And he got the results, he got more goals. Same goes with the signing of Brian Zaragoza, same for other players. But Gasperini knows that Roma needs to change a lot in the summer. There are at least 5 or 6 players, including Dybala, Pellegrini, El Shaarawy, Celik, Dobvik, Ferguson, that probably are on the way out, but they need to be replaced by players of the same quality, if not more. But obviously that goes back to the questions of the owners, the American, the Friedkins, who also own Everton. How much are they keen to commit to spend in Roma now that they got Everton in a very good position, perhaps even competing for Europe next season, or maybe going into Europe? They might end up with 2 clubs in the same competition as well. So there are a lot of question marks. I feel that if Gasperini leaves Roma, it's a bad decision for everyone involved, but he cannot discard it either, to be fair.
Of course, the other thing we've got to bear in mind with Gasperini is he is spectacularly old and cantankerous and really good at falling out with people. Not like me and Daniele, we're getting on famously here on Trans-Europe Express. We'll be going to the other side of the capital next here on Trans-Europe Express.
You played in Korea and Japan, didn't you? World Cup in 2002. Did you find it hard, the weather conditions to play in?
They are tough, and in South Africa as well. We played a game, and then the altitude, the ball moves different and everything. And if you're not used to it, as we know, we all love to go on holiday in the summer, but playing football, running around in that heat and that weather, it takes its toll at the time, and we're just not a nation that's used to that. So that's one of the major things I look at when it comes to that tournament being over there.
What about strikers? We know Harry Kane's going to go, but if you looked at the Euros, he was injured, wasn't he? And Gareth Southgate was still playing game. Maybe they didn't trust other strikers in the squads. What do you think of tonight? Do you think Solanke and Calvert-Lewin have to put in a performance?
I think it's their chance of breaking in, isn't it? It's their chance of solidifying themselves in that talk of being the one to take over, because we really don't know who's going to take over from Harry Kane or what it's going to look like after he leaves. I was always
The TalkSport 20k giveaway.
It's competition town now, and it's a belter. Just imagine what you do with £20,000. That's right, 20 big ones, because TalkSport are giving one lucky listener the chance to bag 20 grand completely tax-free Don't miss your chance to win this huge amount of money. Here's how to enter. For your chance to win, text WIN to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or call 0343 418 7260. Lines close 9th of April 2026 at 4 p.m. That's when you'll need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus, UK residents only. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talksport.com. So for your chance to win £20,000, text WIN to 83338 now. And back on Trans-Europe Express, because we've got Daniele with us, we need to use his full analytical capabilities and skills and just all-round fertile mind. So what we really wanted to do is get under the skin of what's happening at Lazio at the moment. And before you tell us, Daniele, I think we have to put this into some sort of context and say really what Lazio mean in terms of English football supporting European football, really. Because if we go back to the start of the 90s and if we go back to 1992, Lazio are the reason that we as a nation of football supporters got into Italian football in England in the first place. It's the reason that a lot of people of my age, slightly older and slightly younger, have an Italian team. Because if Paul Gascoigne never went to play at Lazio, we wouldn't have had it on our televisions on Channel 4. And it was appointment watching. Football Italia, Gazzetta Football Italia as well. All the Saturday mornings, all the Sunday afternoons. It was so important to us culturally. And you know what? Lazio were there at the start of it all. Of course, Gazza wasn't involved in that first game that was televised on Channel 4. Sampdoria 3, Lazio 3, and what a brilliant game that was. I think I fell in love with Beppe Signori that day. But I think for that reason, a lot of people will look at Lazio and think, what on earth has happened there? Because they will have seen all these images of an empty Olimpico. And that's in stark contrast to really since the Mourinho era, Roma have filled it more often than not.
Yeah, it's a club that is in decline, is a very slow decline, and is a club that seems to have no direction. So the images that people would have seen in recent weeks are of an empty Olimpico, because the protest from the Lazio ultras and fans has been very civilized, has been very educated. They decided to boycott their matches in protest against the president, Claudio Lotito, and the way he's been managing or mismanaging the team so far. So basically what they've done, they have avoided any clashes, they've avoided any violences. They just decided not to go to games, with rare exceptions. They came back into the game 2 weeks ago when they played Milan, and actually Lazio won that game to show how important it is to play, of course, with a full stadium. But why the protest? Because Lazio were hit by a transfers ban this summer, because of their overspending and financial misgivings. But this has the results of a policy of Lotito that has denied investments in the team for quite a while. But the decline really started quite suddenly, because as earlier as in 2023, Lazio finished runners-up behind Napoli. The following years, they reached the Champions League last 16 and beat Bayern Munich 1-0 in the first leg, only to lose 3-0 in the second leg. But since then, really, the investment haven't really followed, and the team has been stripped of its talents, and players of prospects have been signed, and it feels like a waste, because of course being managed by one of the best tacticians in Serie A, Maurizio Sarri, but not giving him the tools and the players to express his gameplay fully, of course it's a waste of resources. And now Lazio languishes 8th in the table. They are still in the Coppa Italia. They need to play the semi-final of the Coppa Italia against Atalanta, the second leg. But yeah, it's been a nothing season, with a few sparks, a win against Juve, a win against Lazio, against Milan, but really mediocrity all over.
And you talk about that decline, Daniele. It's really interesting, because if we go back to the start of the season, I think I don't think Maurizio Sarri came in with his eyes closed. I think he knew that, you know, he was going into a team that was post Milinkovic-Savic, for example.
Yeah.
But, you know, there were still players there. I don't think anyone was expecting a Champions League place or anything like that. But I think it's the transfer ban that was the thing, wasn't it? Because briefly, it looked as if Sarri might leave a couple of days in his tenure. Exactly what happened with Marcelo Bielsa, going back to something that Tim was talking about earlier. So it was really interesting to see after one of those recent games where they had, a couple of thousand fans in the stadium. I think it was against Sassuolo. They had 2,000-3,000 fans in. To hear Sarri saying, "I stayed for the fans, and now the fans aren't here. I wondered why I stayed." So I guess the question is, firstly, where does Sarri go from here? And secondly, I really want to get under the skin of this wholesale protest, because we've had lots of fans all over the world, not just in Serie A, but in the Premier League, all sorts of fans completely frustrated, infuriated with the direction of their club. But it's very difficult to get your fellow fans to buy into a protest where you don't go to the game.
And that's been
have they got that buy-in?
Yeah, that's been the real strength, because the feeling of abandonment from the Lazio fan is widespread. It's not just your ultras, but also your regular fan and people who would go to buy the match tickets, that they understand that they have fallen behind Roma, they have fallen behind the other teams in Italy, and they are no longer competitive. The transfer ban, of course, has been part of it, and the fact that Sarri was not being told the full truth before signing the contract has contributed to the discontent. But credit to Sarri for sticking to it and to putting out every week a team that at least works really hard. Lazio are not a shadow of Sarri ball. They cannot do it. They simply don't have the players to play the style of football that Sarri would like, possession and high press. But they do run and they do work hard and they give 100% with a team that is pretty much the same as last season. Actually, it is a team that has been impoverished, because in January, they could actually sell and buy players. And what did they do? They sold the two best players, Tati Castellanos to West Ham, Matteo Guendouzi to Fenerbahce, which, you know, they got good money out of it, around 70 million. And then they brought in Kenneth Taylor from Ajax, scored a couple of goals last weekend. It's a good prospect, okay? But, you know, it needs time to bed in. Daniel Maldini from Atalanta, again, a prospect team, not exactly a replacement for Castellanos. And Petar Ratkov from Red Bull Salzburg, who Sarri said, "I don't know who he is. I never seen him playing." At least he gave him 7 games in Serie A. So credit to Sarri for even playing Ratkov. But the paradox of this is that all of this is going on while there is a proposed move to a new stadium in 2032. So Lotito is already presenting plans to move into a new stadium. In the meantime, people are wondering if he's willing to sell the club. So it's almost like if you're trying to sell your house while you're having a new kitchen fitted in. It doesn't quite work, you know, with the house viewing. People might get a little bit confused. And that's exactly what Lotito is doing. He's convinced Lazio are going to inherit the old Stadio Flaminio of Rome, where before Lodigiani were playing and a few Six Nation games were played, but now is abandoned. Transform it into Lazio House, leave Roma to develop their own stadium somewhere else, and obviously get the club back on track. A club that looks cash-strapped and maybe with the on-sale cartel on the door. So it's all very, very confusing. So yes, this is where we are for Lazio.
Well, there you go. I look forward to the opening game at Flaminio in a couple of years' time. Only you and me will be there, but it'll be a great feature for Trans Europe Express. We're on the home straight now on TEE. Your questions next. Trans-Europe Express, and what a tour de force it has been tonight, as every week with me, Andy Brassell and Daniele Fisichella. And now we have some of your questions. We haven't done this for a while, and it's really nice to get you guys involved. Opening one, we're going to get straight into them, from Amanda, a Sporting fan. Bernardo Silva is set to leave Manchester City when his contract expires this summer. Could you see him making a return to Portuguese football? Well, you know what, Amanda? Benfica have had a little fish, but it doesn't look like that's going to be happening because his representatives have said, look, he's got his mind on something else. It's really interesting, isn't it, Daniele? Because Bernardo Silva is someone who, I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's clearly someone who wants to go and see the world. You know, when he was at Monaco, he's living in a tiny flat, and he was going to visit his best mate at university in Glasgow and kipping on his floor when he had a couple of days off. But funnily enough, because he's been at Manchester City, it's really been difficult for other clubs to get him, hasn't it? There's never been the right time and the right financial package to make it happen.
Yeah, unfortunately for the Portuguese fan, a destination to another top club in Europe seems more likely because of probably the huge wages on, and unless he can reduce some of his wages, is unlikely Sporting can afford him. I would love to see him in Italy, for example. I think he could fit very well in a team like Juventus or Inter, that they need somebody with that kind of skills. But yeah, I think probably not just yet for Portuguese football.
Juventus, there we go. Well, we've got, as if by magic, Andre, a Juventus fan, has asked you, Daniele, could you see Juventus making a move for Robert Lewandowski at the end of the season? Maybe less likely now it looks like they're re-signing Dusan Vlahovic?
Dusan Vlahovic is about to sign a new contract, although he wants an improvement on his salary, which I think will be a difficult negotiation after the season he's had. Yes, he's already quite well paid. But Juventus will have to ship out two of the players they signed last summer, Luis Openda, and Jonathan David, who incidentally scored 2 goals against Iceland, but I don't think it will quite convince the Juventus hierarchy that is made for them. If they do manage to do that, Lewandowski will be a coup for them. It is something I think they will consider. It's a name that they would consider, and it will definitely be an exciting one for them. Again, wage could be an issue, but if Juventus do a good business in terms of selling a couple of players, yes, I think they could go for him.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. While we're on strikers, Andy, the Liverpool fan, has said Liverpool have been linked with Sporting striker Luis Suarez. Just how good is he? No jokes about attacking bite. Thank you very much. It's not that Luis Suarez. It's the guy from Colombia, of course, who has scored 33 goals for his club this season. Now, he has been brilliant. There's no denying that. But I think there are two ways of looking at this, Daniele. Firstly, it puts in context what Victor Gyökeres was able to do in Sporting, because you've got a guy who's come up short a big club before, notably Marseille, before going to the Spanish second division and Almeria and pumping up his value there. On the other hand, I think sometimes we kind of overlook that people develop at different speeds, and actually it's fine to have a club where it doesn't work out and you can just make it up later, because Suarez is one of the most natural finishers you'll ever see.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a clinical finisher, and he has flourished in a system late at Sporting Lisbon, which again goes back to the point you made. Sometimes it's about different stage when they develop, and the system and the environment is more important than the player itself. And it shows that, yeah, he was a very good replacement for Victor Gyökeres, of course.
We've got a Spurs fan involved, of course, a few sleepless nights for them at the moment. Jay has got involved, saying, based on De Zerbi's time at Marseille, is he capable of delivering instant success at Spurs and keeping them up? Well, you know, he's quite a demanding physical style of play. With Tottenham's squad at the moment, that feels like a bit of an ask to me. I mean, surely De Zerbi doesn't want to go anywhere near this for the moment, right?
For me, it's a categorical no. I hope that Zerbi doesn't take the Spurs job just yet, just now. I do hope Spurs stay up. And, you know, West Ham fans can say whatever they want, but I do hope they stay up. And if they do stay up, I hope that Zerbi considers the job and thinks about it and have another go at managing a Premier League club. At the moment, with only 7 games to go for Spurs, and for the Zerbi, will be the wrong choice. They need a caretaker manager. They need somebody from inside the club. They need somebody who already is there that can step in straight away. They do not need a De Zerbi right now because, as you said, Andy, he needs time. He needs a pre-season. He cannot just quick fix a situation that does look bad. I'm afraid for Igor Tudor, things haven't worked out. I was wrong when I said Igor Tudor would have fixed Tottenham. I clearly underestimated the job, and perhaps I've overestimated Tudor in that situation. But the Zerbi, no, please, do not take that job.
Yeah, there's nothing to gain for him, really, is there? Look, Jamie, the Arsenal fan, who definitely has got his stirring stick here, says, where do you think Igor Tudor should go next? Well, whatever's happened at Spurs, I think it'll be forgotten pretty quickly in Italy, won't it?
Yes, I think it would be forgotten. He still has a good reputation over in Italy. I don't think that 1 sacking or 2 sacking as he had this season must define your career. He was a wrong choice in the wrong moment. I think stepping down now and finding a mutual agreement for him is the right choice, also considering that he has had extra issues and family issues and a bereavement to deal with, which of course have affected him, and we must not forget that as well. He's a well-regarded manager in Italy that has been able to get the job done in different clubs, as well as he did in France, and he always left a good impression overall on fans. I think his career doesn't end here. Where should he go next? Take a break, of course, he has already done it, but I think comes next season or mid next season, he will be on the books of many, many clubs in Italy. Before hiring Paolo Vanoli, Fiorentina were thinking about him, so that shows you that, he was already being considered for another job in Italy, and I'm sure others will come.
Yeah, we wish him all the best with his current situation as well. Now, we're entering the zone of the unrealistic for these last couple of questions, Daniele, if you'll bear with us. One from Dan, the Roma fan. Is there any chance that Mo Salah could make a return to Roma? Look, financially, it seems absolutely impossible, but we'd love to see it, wouldn't we?
Oh, yeah, it would be great because it is a team that has given him a second chance, really, after he didn't quite make it at Chelsea, and is a team that has really helped his development. But now Mo Salah, he has got the wage of a superstar as he is, and I think he's got the demands of a top Premier League player. Roma simply cannot afford him for the wage structures they have. Unless he is willing to cut his wage bills, there is no way Roma or any other club in Italy can afford him. However, if he's willing to do that, Roma could be a potential destination, but I'm sure other Italian teams, Inter, perhaps Juventus or Milan, maybe more Inter than anyone else, would be willing to approach him. So then it would be up for him. For me, it makes sense for Salah to go to Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, there is the biggest Egypt expats community outside of Egypt, of course, which I think will be interesting for him to spend a couple of years there. He could play alongside the likes of Ronaldo and other players for at least 1 or 2 seasons. I think is the best move for him rather than going to another Premier League club or to going to Italy. And this is probably an environment where they can afford his demand. So for me, for Salah after the World Cup is Saudi.
We've got time to just about squeeze one more in with well, I'm picking one with a pretty quick answer here. We've got one from Alex in OKC saying Real Madrid have a €9 million buyback option for Nico Paz for 2026. Is there any realistic chance that another club still tries to beat them to the punch?
No, absolutely. Real Madrid are
there you go. I told you it was short.
No, it's short because it's a win-win situation for Real Madrid. If they keep him, and we heard it from team before, great player, Argentina are going to build the future post-Messi on him. If they keep him for 9 million, it's a bargain. If they sign him and then sell him again, they gain because they're going to sell him for 40, 50 millions at least. So no, I don't think they're going to be any chance, I'm afraid, Alex.
Now, there we are at the end of Trans-Europe Express, and what a week it's been. Thanks so much, Daniele, for your company. Where will you be watching Bosnia versus Italy? And you can answer from behind the sofa if you want.
And well, hopefully not from behind the sofa. I'll be watching on the sofa in company of my eldest son. Had it been in Cardiff, I would have gone to Cardiff, but Zenica, I'm afraid, it's quite a stretch from England. So yeah, Tuesday on the sofa. Let's leave it there.
Yeah, another one of the statistics, another one of the young people who needs to see Italy not only get to a World Cup, but win a knockout match there. But we'll leave that for another day. Thank you so much, Daniele. And thank you for everyone who voted in our poll. Who is the best goalkeeper of the last 25 years? Gigi Buffon was the winner in your honour, Daniele, 44%. Manuel Neuer, 31%. Iker Casillas, 11%. And other 14%. Thank you so much for joining us. All our love to Danny Kelly, of course, and we will see you again next week on Trans Europe Express. Thanks for
Liverpool have announced on Tuesday the cost of attending a match at Anfield is going to increase. It's going to go up by 3% next season, following further increases in line with inflation over the next two campaigns. They've decided to do this despite consulting with the Liverpool FC Supporters Board, a decision which was firmly opposed by fan leaders. Liverpool have revealed that adult general admission tickets, which currently cost £39 to £61, are going to rise between about £1.25 and £1.75. Adult season tickets, priced at £713 to £904, will increase by £21 or £27. They say the cost of junior tickets and local general tickets available to those with a